We have a quorum. Calling to order Duncanville City Council meeting. This is a budget work session, August 8th, 2019. Let's see. Discuss and deliberate the FY 2019-2020 proposed annual budget concerning general fund expenses, revenues, utility fund expenses, revenues, CIP, miscellaneous department funds. City Council may direct staff to make additions, deletions, or corrections to the budget, which is the subject of discussion and deliberation for future and/or final consideration by the City Council. Okay, who's up first? Mr. Hugwood.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. We appreciate you being here today.
Housekeeping. This loose thing in front of you is that. Okay. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Mayor and Council, so tonight what we're going to do is present to you the proposed FY20 budget. As we discussed with you before in June, what we did at that time was we looked at FY19 and where we thought we were going to end the year. We looked at FY20 at that time, kind of preliminarily, what we thought was coming, discussed with you a number of different things that we were looking at for the budget. We got your input on those things, and then we continued to work on the budget since June, still refining things, looking at what things we could add or delete out of the budget, trimming costs, and we were waiting essentially too for the certified tax roll numbers to come in. We also were waiting during that time, getting more of our sales tax data to where we could get a better refined estimate of where we thought we would be, what the trend was doing. So all of those things have been factored in, but per the city charter, the city manager is required to propose a budget, file a proposed budget by July 31st, which is what we did. We sent you that budget summary in PDF, and we're going to go over that tonight. Our certified tax roll numbers came in about a few days before that deadline, so we were able to make some last-minute adjustments, and we will go through all of that. So as we go through this, we're going to kind of start out high level, and then we'll get down into the funds in more detail and discuss the different cost centers. So this is a workshop, so please, as you have questions, please feel free to ask us and stop us. If we don't know the answer right off, then we'll get it and come back to you later or today. So with this, as we go into the budget, as a city manager, our goal, finance and management, is to first and foremost, the budget is what supports your initiatives, your goals. And we've talked about that before. I show you the kind of the circular planning process. The City Council's goals are what helps us define what we need to have as far as resources. If the council then does not give us the resources to accomplish the goals, we can't get that done. So it is a circular and iterative process. But first and foremost, when we develop the budget, our goal is to provide the core services that a city provides and maintain or improve the service delivery to the citizens. We try to address any input that you give us, citizen input on priorities, and we emphasize and try to maintain our infrastructure, believing that if we don't maintain our infrastructure and make improvements, capital improvements as we need to, then we're kicking the can down the road, and a future council, future administration is going to have to deal with that. It's probably going to be more expensive. So we try to put adequate resources into maintaining the infrastructure and improving the infrastructure that we have in the city. And by that, that's all infrastructure. That's water, wastewater, streets, parks, our facilities, all the public facilities. Secondly, we utilize sound financial principles. We do look at multi-year planning. In your budget book, you have fund summaries that show the out years, the following years. So we are looking 3, 4, 5 years out of how are the decisions that we're making right now going to impact future years, and of course based on what assumptions we make of those future years and not knowing exactly what will happen. But we do look at that. We also look at our current trends, economic conditions, looking at, especially in the area, for example, of building and permits, are we expecting major construction or not to come in that would bring in permit revenue? Looking at sales tax, I already mentioned sales tax trends. Where is that heading? That is one of our major sources of revenue. And then secondly, we maintain an adequate fund balance reserve in our major funds. In the general fund, our target is 75 days. By our financial policies, the required minimum is 60 days. I prefer 75 days because that gives us a little cushion. Generally accepted accounting principles for GFOA are 15 to 25% fund balance. Since we do ours in days, 75 days is actually 20.5%, so it's right in the middle of the band. 60 days is right at the bottom of the band, and I don't feel comfortable being there. So we have tried to maintain, and we have been at a 75-day target. At the same time, we don't want to be a lot above that because then that's unused funds. Those are funds that are sitting there, taxpayer money that is not being used adequately. So we really work hard to try to maintain and be at the 75 days and not set aside a lot of extra money. We also then maintain a balanced budget, meaning that our ongoing expenditures are held within our ongoing expected revenues. We do not use the fund balance or the reserves to balance the operating budget. So you will see that our overall budget is more than our revenues, but that's because we're using reserves for one-time projects, and we'll talk about that later as well. But we do not use reserves for ongoing expenses. We only use them for one-time projects. So I'm going to give you some of the highlights of the budget, starting with the general fund. We do believe that this is a very solid budget that we're proposing. We are proposing a tax rate reduction of 1/2 cent, which will reduce the ad valorem tax rate. As we will point out later, the tax, once we got our certified tax roll back, we were actually below the rollback rate at the current property tax rate. But we were able to do the things that we felt we needed to do in the budget without keeping that higher tax rate. We felt we could reduce the tax rate and still do the things we thought were necessary in the budget. So we are proposing a 1/2 cent tax reduction. Yes, sir.
Can you repeat that again? I had trouble hearing you. That particular portion, what you just said.
It was below the rollback. We did not have to reduce the tax rate, but we were able to do the things that we felt we needed to do in the budget, and I'll show you some additional things. So all of the things that we felt we needed to do in the budget, but still reduce the tax rate, and so that is what we were proposing.
So is this the first time that this has happened, that we've had a reduction in the tax rate?
No, sir. Actually, this is the second year in a row. Last year, we reduced the tax rate by 1 penny. This year by 1/2 cent, so that is 1.5 cents over these two years.
So this is actually a trend.
And we are starting a trend.
Fabulous.
But it
Thank
doesn't
you.
mean it's precedent.
Okay, now you confused me.
Because, well, okay, trend means if we were to plot that on a graph, yes, you'd have two different, you'd be going this way. But I'm saying it doesn't set precedent because each individual year is evaluated on its own merit.
Thank you for clarifying.
Now, as we
One other, if I remember some of our discussions about this too, while we were under the rollback rates, yeah, that was it. We were pushing right very close to it. And I think there was some risk assessment done internally.
There was.
To say that, should we bump so close or should we back off just a little? So
Yes, so that is correct. When we were looking at it, Richard did a calculation of the rollback because we get the rollback, the official rollback rates from the county. Typically, we don't get those until after August 1st. So Richard does a calculation. Based on his calculation, we were under, but we were close. We actually got the county's calculations before the budget was filed, and we saw that we were actually farther from the rollback than what Richard had calculated. So we were very comfortably under, or we were comfortably under the rollback, but we still just chose to go forward with the proposed tax rate reduction.
right, thank you.
So some of the other highlights in the general fund, we are funding one new full-time position. We're very sensitive to adding positions given what the House Bill 2 will do for property tax caps in the future, but we felt it was very necessary. We will discuss that further in detail here later on in the presentations tonight. And then, as we talked about before, while we're not adding a position, the crime victim advocate, the funding now is no longer grant funded, so we are absorbing that funding in the general fund as opposed to doing away with the position. Because there again, it is a very important position in our police department, especially for crime victims. We felt that it was necessary to do that, to keep that position. Yes, sir.
So, in case a year from now, when we more fully understand the impact of Senate Bill 2, are there any contingency plans being thought of as to how and what changes will have to be made in order to be in compliance with Senate Bill 2?
Yes, we have. We are looking at those things and considering what areas we might have to reduce as we go into that next year.
Will council have any type of input in terms of that particular
Absolutely.
process?
Absolutely. Kind of a segue to that, compensation adjustment, as I mentioned to you a few weeks ago, and kind of carrying on with Councilmember Harvey's comments about preparing for next year. We were looking at a compensation adjustment for employees going into the budget. As I met with other city managers in the area and heard from my colleagues what they were planning to do, the general consensus that I was hearing from a lot of city managers was they were going to try to do what they could on compensation this year, expecting that they were not going to be able to do very much in the future years. Given that, we upped our compensation adjustment a little bit from what we were initially planning to do. But again, we can afford to do it in the budget and still provide the tax rate reduction.
So is that flat, is that flat across the board, or is that based upon performance? I always get
It is
that
a
question.
flat amount, it is a flat percentage based on, it's cost of living flat adjustment. It is not, and we'll talk about that some more too as we get into it, on the general employees, it is not changing the pay range, the minimum or maximum pays. It's only giving tenured employees an increase within those ranges. On police and fire, it will change the minimum pay and the maximum pay, so it will adjust the entire pay scale, which then keeps us more competitive for starting pay for police and firefighters.
So that 3% across in general, that's for everyone. So there's no 3 in one case and 4 in the other. It's not a.
It is not a performance-based or merit-based type of pay increase. That's correct.
Cost of living, like you said.
It is something we have discussed. We're still working on our performance management system, and you have to get that in place before you can base your pay on it. And then, there are pros and cons to merit-based pay, and especially when you're talking about 3%, there's not a lot of variation when you talk about merit. So we have discussed that for a couple of years here. It is something that's on our mind, but we have not gotten to the point where we feel our performance management system, our performance measurement system is where we would want it to be able to do a merit-based pay.
What have you allocated? So, and you may talk about this later. What have you allocated for any overtime costs at all? That's going to hit your budget. That's going to hit budget as well.
Yes, we do allocate for overtime in our budgets.
So we'll see that later as well.
Not specifically, we haven't broken out the overtime in our presentations, but I mean, it is in our fund summary. It's a line item in each department. Some departments have overtime and some do not.
So will we be able to look at that over time periods when Richard's reporting the finance to see where we are compensation-wise? Is that included in the compensation overall amounts, or whether we know if it's negative, not negative? Because if we are going 3% and then we have overtime, it's going to reflect your overall budget. So I'm just kind of, that's why I was curious how will we be updated on your overtime budget?
The budgets all include, that was part of the process that we went through. Every department scheduled what they felt based on past history and based on their current levels of staffing, what kind of overtime they would need. So that's already built into this year's budget.
Right, and then as we go through the budget process, we're looking at the current year and adjusting as we need to. So if the budget, can be reduced or it needs to be increased, then we make those adjustments through the year. And then at the end of the year, when it's a revised budget, that incorporates that.
I'm sorry, last question is that, do you know if we exceeded it last year, or did we meet that budget for overtime last year?
Well, overall, we were under budget on expenditures last year.
Salary expenditure?
I didn't particularly break that down and do a strata analysis of it, but just overall, we were under budget.
But that's overall, that's not in the salary category.
I didn't do a strata breakdown of that.
Okay.
So in a lot of cases too, our overtime is offset by vacancies. Because in some departments, if you have more vacancies, you're gonna have more overtime, so you're offsetting those costs. And then some departments are gonna have built-in overtime because of what they do.
All right, thank you.
Some other highlights of the general fund. Also, again, as I said, we were able to do the things we felt we needed to do. We talked about the red light cameras, and that has gone away because of the state legislation. So we had to move our operation and maintenance costs that were related to our traffic signal systems into the general fund, whereas it was paid for by the red light fund before. So that was $238,000 that we absorbed into the general fund in the traffic division. I would like to point out that this is a significant amount. That $238,000 represents about 1 cent on the tax roll, 1 cent on the tax rate, and we'll show you that later on, those calculations. But that is about a penny on the tax rate that we have to absorb from the red light fund. So whether you agree or disagree with red light cameras, the fact is red light camera revenue, which was paid predominantly by non-Duncanville residents, has gone away. And now Duncanville residents are paying this penny for traffic signal maintenance. Secondly, we did increase the street maintenance budget, so we were able to increase the amount over this year's funding by $150,000. Again, we'll talk more in depth about street maintenance later. We're not where we feel we need to be, but we have made significant improvements over the last 3 years over where we had been historically on street maintenance. And so we tried to add a little bit more in this year again to bump that up some. We included $10,000 for the neighborhood signage neighborhood enhancement, entryway enhancement program that we discussed with y'all before, so we have funded some in there. What we need to do now is we'll move forward with creating a policy that will come to the council for approval at some point. But
You said you had 20,000 already in there, right?
No, the 20,000 that you're thinking of is the neighborhood sign toppers.
Okay.
Actually, I probably mislabeled this. This should be neighborhood entryway.
Okay.
So we do have 20,000 allocated for the sign toppers for neighborhoods, for their end, but this was more for like the monument signs, neighborhood sign, landscaping or whatever, a matching grant.
Matching
that we
grant,
talked
okay.
about.
All right, good, thank you.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I put the wrong title.
Thank you for adding that, by the way.
We also, as I mentioned earlier, about using reserves for one-time projects, we've transferred $425,000 in excess revenues or excess reserve funds over that 75-day balance to one-time projects, and we'll discuss those projects here later as well. Those are the same ones that we talked with you about in June. And then as we also talked to you about in June, upcoming in 21 or in FY21 and later, we know we're going to have to make our public safety radios compliant with P25. Our intent is to move on to the Dallas County radio system at the time. At that time, that is when they are expecting you to get that system up. But we will be responsible for purchasing new radios, and that can be very expensive. So what we're doing is setting aside $350,000 for FY21. If you may remember when we talked about it before, we were discussing $250,000. I wanted to go ahead and increase it. We've increased it to $350. So just again, trying to set aside a little more because we think that that cost can be around $700,000 and upwards to buy all new radios that are P25 compliant. So we don't know yet the cost. We know it's going to be significant. We've got some funds available. We want to go ahead and earmark them for that future expense. All of these things we were able to do. We know property taxes. We've recognized that property tax appraisals have gone up, and even though we've decreased the tax rate, the average single-family resident value, based on an average home value in Duncanville, will see an increase in their property taxes of about $104 a year. But we were able to address a lot of things and continue addressing the infrastructure in Duncanville. Again, on highlights in the utility fund, we are not proposing a rate increase for water or sewer. This is again the second year in a row that we are not passing along any rate increases from Dallas Water Utilities or Trinity River Authority to the customers.
But did we get an increase? Did they
Yeah.
increase on us?
Yes, we did. We'll talk about that when we get to the utility fund.
Within the utility fund, again, we are proposing $10 million, $10.5 million in capital improvement projects. Again, continuing our efforts to improve our water and wastewater infrastructure through pipe replacement, and other facilities. And then, as we also discussed with you before, we are reserving that $5 million now for the automated metering infrastructure, and we are moving with that. We have started meetings and so forth, and later on when we get into the utility fund, we can give you a quick update on where we're at on that project. But again, the utility fund includes these things in it with no rate increase to the customers.
So was that $5 million we set aside, is that restricted funds?
Well, we are keeping it restricted for the AMI, and Richard will talk about that, as how that's fitting into your fund balance, and why we're comfortable with where everything is at right now. And so we'll show you those when he gets into the details of the utility fund.
The technical term would be more like designated or assigned. Or
So maybe-
committed,
Okay.
earmarked.
So you could pull it out if you need, an emergency, you could pull it out.
As long as it had not already been committed to a contract, yes. So continuing on, I just want to hit the highlights of the town hall meeting that we had. We've done this now for several years where we've gotten citizen input. It's not a formal input, scientific or anything, but we have a town hall meeting with citizens. We had about 50 citizens at that meeting in March. We covered the general fund and discussed the revenues and expenditures, and then we asked citizens to write as many sticky notes as they would like on what they would like to see the city spend more on, less on, or keep the same. We put those sticky notes up on different boards and try to group them by category, and then we give the citizens a certain number of stickers and ask them to go put a sticker on the 3 or 5 most important things they think in whatever category it is. So from that we get kind of an unscientific vote. And as you can see, this is how those fell out. And I'll talk about some of these then and kind of how we address these in the budget. On commuter rail, since that was the top one this year, which was surprising, that had not been like that before. I had not seen that on there. But we don't have any specific funding set aside for this study or for moving forward. However, we have had a number of meetings and conversations with DART and with the COG. And the COG has launched a Southern Dallas County transit study that they are funding, and it will include Duncanville and the Mobility 2045 plan. And we've had discussions with them as well about starting or doing a study on the feasibility of commuter rail for Duncanville and Cedar Hill. So we are working on that, but we don't have any specific funding set aside for that. Economic development, restaurants is always a top concern of citizens. We continue with the funding for different grant programs through the EDC for redevelopment and repurposing, facade improvements, signage, etc. And we also, as we talked about before, we have budgeted a part-time intern who will assist the Economic Development Director with creating and administering a business property database, and that will help us be more responsive to businesses who are coming in to town looking for properties that match their needs. We will have better information at our disposal to be able to assist them with that. Dog Park also came up high on the list this year. It is in the Parks Master Plan, but we do not have any dedicated funding at this time for that. And there is a preliminary part that's kind of been noted in the Park Master Plan, but I think that also deserves more review and study. But it had not, up until this time, had not kind of risen to a high level priority.
But it does have a following.
It does have a following. It does, absolutely. And so it's something that I think the park board and staff are, more aware of, and we will look at that as we are able to.
This reminds me that, completely forgot about it until just now. When we went to the, I don't know what it was, the orientation at the Tri-City Animal Shelter for the surgical clinic that they're building, one of the deputy directors out there noted that there's something like 4 acres of land behind that building, and they would love to see a Tri-City dog park. And I said, fantastic, because that would take the burden off of us, and it would put it on the Tri-City, and the 3 cities together then could create that dog park. And I asked about location. Of course, it's pretty well known, and with that 4 acres well developed, it could be quite a nice facility. And I said, it fell off my radar. I need to go back to him and talk to him, because I asked her to actually give me a pencil drawing of what she anticipated doing and creating. So I will do that and see if we can get that back on.
That's a good thought.
Yeah, there has been some discussion about that as an idea, so I was aware too, but I don't know if it's just still preliminary or what. I think the city of Cedar Hill owns that tract behind the Tri-City Animal Shelter. Public safety, again, public safety usually is high. We are, again, within the budget, trying to address our market competitiveness with police and fire. We've allocated $413,000 to the compensation that I mentioned earlier at 4% and 5%. And then within police and fire, within civil service, there are already built-in steps based on tenure for employees who have less than 7 years for firefighters. For entry-level fire and police, if they have less than 7 years, there are annual steps built within that. So we're continuing our commitment to maintaining that competitiveness. Also continuing on, bike lanes and trails was also higher on the list. We have $1.5 million that was approved in the bond election for bike lanes and trails, and then, as you know, we just recently council approved a bike lane study on Duncanville Road, so that has been funded within the budget. And then public information also, and we will continue to expand our marketing efforts in public information. We have allocated some funds this year as well for professional video development, and April has already been working with someone on that. We've been getting some stock video this year, and we will do a professional video again next year for the annual State of the City. And we will continue our annual report, and we're also working on a new resident guide as well. So again, trying to increase our information outreach to the citizens. And then what was shown on the less, as you see, for spend less, the major thing there was red light cameras. And as we know, red light cameras have gone away, so I think we've addressed that. With that, I will turn it over to Richard, and most of tonight is the Richard show.
Thank you, Kevin. So right away, I wanted to give you all a quick calendar look at our budget process. So all the things that have check marks on, we've completed. Started this process in February with our training and our new software. It's going very well. I think people very quickly picked up on our new software and were able to use it. It's much more intuitive than our old software, and it also is a part of our financial software, so we don't have two disparate systems that we're working out of, which is very nice. Today we're at the August 8th budget workshop. Later tonight, this evening, we will need to take a straw vote on the proposed tax rate that Kevin discussed a minute ago, because that's a requirement. I have to publish that in order to go forward with our public hearings. So then we have 3 important dates left. The next 3 council meetings, we'll have 2 public hearings, and then we have to do the approval and adoption on September 17th. Wanted to give you a general overview of all funds put together. That of course this doesn't take into consideration any of our internal service funds. These are just external service funds. So if we look at our total revenues across funds, they total $60,788,987, and you can see that property tax, sales tax, those are the major incomes. Water and wastewater fees make up a good portion, and then the remainder. If we look at how those revenues are distributed by fund, 54% in the general fund, 29% in the utility fund, 6.3% in solid waste, 4.3% in economic development. Other funds that are small things combined, like capital improvement, HOT, EDC, et cetera, 3.1%, and the field house at 3.2%. What I did here is made a slide that tells you what the increase and decrease was. I'm comparing the FY19 adopted budget to the FY20 budget in this table, and so calculated that increase or decrease. And then I reference what page number. You can find that the summary things in your budget book are in the first column, and then the last column is Kevin mentioned a bit ago that we do 5-year planning. In the back of your books and these higher page numbers, you have a fold-out page that takes into consideration everything from FY18 actuals all the way out to 2025 projected numbers. So you can look and see more detail on those pages about those numbers. Looking at expenditures, again, across all funds, but looking at them by fund, they total $63.2 million. The general fund, of course, has 53.6 of those expenditures, 30.7 in the utility fund, 6.4 in solid waste, and the remainders.
Richard, that sales tax number, I mean, you already passed it, but that sales tax was it 16%? Well, let's go back just a second. Yeah, 17%. Is that what we're projecting when we 2019, 20?
Yeah, that's not what that's the percentage of the grand total of what we project for revenues for fiscal year 20.
The sales tax is our second largest revenue source in the general fund.
So if for any reason that is decreased, it then comes from where? The sales tax percentage is lower than we projected?
Where we projected, and I'm usually pretty close with my projections, we're probably not going to be off any more than a few $100,000 that we can absorb from fund balance. If we got anything beyond that, if we had some kind of real major catastrophic economic thing that happened to us, that's where the importance of the 75-day fund balance comes in. Kevin's much more comfortable having that extra 15 days on top of the 60 for cushion for events just like this, so that we don't have to disrupt operations. We can dip into that excess fund balance or that reserve fund balance.
All right, thank you.
So, Richard, with
I'm sorry.
expenditures exceeding revenues, does that not create an unbalanced budget?
Well, we'll talk about that as we go through each one, and Kevin alluded to it a minute ago, that because we are taking funds out that are from reserves, we're showing more expenditures than we're showing in revenues. But when we look at it on an operational basis, you'll see that it's a balanced budget.
I think I got it.
I'll show you those things when we get into the funds.
So these, okay, all right, so these expenditures do include some of the monies coming out of reserves, because they're expenditures
They're one
according
time.
to those individual priorities, but in terms of pure P&L, pure P&L, we have a balanced budget.
We do, yes. And so, again, I did the same thing on expenditures. I took the FY19 expenditures versus the FY20 for all of the major funds and calculated what the increase or decrease is, referencing the page numbers. You can look at the summary, you can look at the 5-year plan and look at more detail. Okay, so what we're about to do now is to get into the general fund, get down into examining revenues and expenditures more closely. Then Todd's going to talk about compensation and benefits and personnel. And then I'll talk a little bit about the one-time project funds, how we're doing those. And then I'll also talk about the utility fund. And then Greg Ramey will talk about our capital improvement projects. And then Jennifer will talk about all the other funds. So just a big picture here, our FY20 budget, we've got an ending fund balance target of $6.6 million. That's right at the 75-day. We're actually got a little $505 cushion there, the way we budgeted that. And so if we look at our general fund.
Go back on that one. That's where you can see
Give us a minute on this one.
I'm sorry.
See the operating revenues and operating expenditures right there is your point that you were just making.
Yes.
Operating expenditures are less than operating revenues.
I'm sorry. Yes, thank you.
I don't know if you said something before about it, but the $340,000 to medical insurance fund, what is that?
Well, we're going to talk about that more. That's we made a transfer in the previous year because our medical insurance fund is so in the negative, and we did another transfer this year. We talked about that quite a bit in our June workshop, that we felt it's necessary to address that. There's so much deficit there that we can't make up for that just pure through premiums. We are increasing premiums to the employees, but it's such a large gap, we can't do it alone there.
We'll get into that one more when we talk about that medical insurance fund too later on tonight.
So if we look at our general fund revenues by source, again, 53% property tax, 24% sales tax from the general fund, transfers 7.9%, franchise receipts 5.6, and something happened to my other category name. It went away up there, but other things that fall in there are your fines and fines and fees and
Maybe it's just all other.
Well, I put several things together because the slide was so busy, but something happened and my other category name went away. So then again, just breaking this down, looking at it from the fact that we are an employee-oriented, people-oriented business. So our salaries comprise 63.9% of our expenditures, and then other operational expenses 31.6%, and then our transfers out 3.5%, and then debt and economic incentives 1%. And this debt is there's only two pieces of debt that you see in the general fund. It's not your bond debt. It's the loan that we did for the Eon building and the loan we did for the economic incentive grant to Fords. So that, just wanted to point that out. Debt service is a whole fund to itself, and you have the fund summary for debt service in there. That's where your bond funds are paid from, not from here. All right, so looking at the revenue sources, I did the same exercise that I did on the snapshot large picture summary, compared FY19 to FY20, increase, decrease, and then I calculated the percentages so that you can see how much in magnitude those changed. So let's see.
Whoa. Give us a minute.
Okay.
Just a minute. So we already know that sales taxes are being hit because of one primary manufacturer.
That's
Revolution.
you can cover each of those.
Oh, okay.
I'm gonna.
What was it?
It's the Ford. It's the Ford.
I'm gonna talk about a little bit more of that in just in a second. Okay.
So we're confident because of our diligent investment practices that we'll be able to go up on investment income, even though the Fed apparently is being convinced to go down on rates.
Well, there's a couple things I feel like that based on what we've seen, that we're going to see not a tremendous amount of cut. They're going to be very slow. They're going to be very cautious and optimistic. But I do feel like that my interest on my investments is going to increase. I have a little bit more cash to manage, and so with that, plus the interest rates being where they are, I'm confident.
Thank you.
So let's get into talking about some of these increases. So on this page, I took away the 19 and 20 columns and just show you the increase, decrease between the 2 years, and then what that percentage is. So the property tax revenue increased 9.8%. That's just through property valuations, and of course that includes a half-cent tax cut in the tax rate. Then our sales tax, we budgeted a 2.4% decrease, and that's the partial loss of business from our major sales tax generator. Then on our franchise receipts, we had a 4% decrease there. Most of that was from the video franchise receipts that we feel that we're sure that we will lose due to the legislation that was passed in the session, but that was offset by an anticipated increase in electric franchise revenues. So then,
Richard, what was that cap on the franchise? It was 250, 250.
There wasn't a cap. This was what they did. They eliminated, if you had two sources of franchise, if you were a business that had two sources of franchise fees that you paid, essentially the Senate bill or the House bill, I don't remember which one it was now, that they said you could choose to pay, if you're a business, you could choose to pay the lesser of the two. We feel that our AT&T franchise fees that we receive for landlines and for video services are the one that will be in conflict, and this is what we will lose because of that legislation. Because they can choose to pay the other. There's always a possibility they might not choose to do that, but I can't imagine that they won't take advantage of the law.
So is that franchise receipt, is that like charter?
Right. So the companies that provide telecommunications as well as video and internet services pay different franchise fees based on those. The state legislature said you don't have to pay all those different franchise fees. You can either pay one or the other, and whichever's the less. And so, the franchise fee that we get from those utility companies, their utilities, is essentially a lease for the right-of-way, for the public right-of-way. So the more things that they're pushing through their fiber or their cables, it makes that property more valuable to them. But the legislature doesn't see it that way. So we are going to see some decrease there.
So, and this may be different as well, is that connected with any type of contract? Were we tied with any type of contract with this?
It's all state law based. We don't have franchise agreement. But franchise agreements with some of them, but it does not. The fees are based on state law. Used to be cable companies. Cities had their own franchise agreements with cable companies and could set different rates. But that went away a number of years ago. That the state preempted all municipal franchise agreements.
Basically, the public utility, the PUC, pretty much regulates all the percentages on the franchise. Okay, so then when we look at our permits and fees, a 9.3% reduction, and that's really based on what we see from economic softening. And when I use that term, I mean that we're not seeing any big projects for new buildings that we've seen in the past. We've had some major new construction for some of our schools and of course our hotels, and so we feel like that we're gonna see that kind of a decrease. And then on our fines, we increased those 3.3%, and that's really based on the increased levels that we're seeing with our police personnel, and that's translated into a higher number of citations as their staffing levels get back closer to where they need to be. Again, the interest investments, we got some higher interest rates, even though, as Patrick pointed out, there's some pressure that those rates may get tapered off a little bit. Anywhere between 25 and 50 basis points is what I anticipate. But I still feel like that based on our investable cash that we're going to see that kind of an increase. Recreation fees increased 20.3%. That's based on an anticipated increase in membership and recreational activity. Our other revenue increased 7.4%. It was primarily because we found, or we were able to get Dallas County to help pay for a portion of our school crossing guards. And so that's a new revenue source that we've not ever had before. So that's a good plus. Our transfers to the utility fund and solid waste fund, the 4B, the hotel motel, all those things are based on formulas that are tied to revenues. They're based on that because of the anticipated amount of work, and the utility fund, all that's based on our wastewater rate study. So we have that done by an external company, and they calculate that percentage for us. And I might say too that I don't charge that full amount. I charge less than that, and that's to reimburse the general fund for work that we perform on those other funds, our overhead costs. And of course, the decrease in the transportation improvement and safety because the red light cameras have gone away. We've talked about that. And so overall, operating revenues, 4.4% increase.
What is our tax rate on hotel motel?
It's at 7%, I believe, isn't it? Yeah.
That's it, 7%?
That's the maximum that it can be.
That's also regulated by state.
That is correct.
Why is it almost 17% in San Antonio? 16.75.
Well, you're paying other taxes too. You've got county and state taxes, there's other layers. And I'm not sure, but I think San Antonio might have another layer on hotel tax for the car that they probably got some special legislation, because I think I remember seeing something on there before as well. But yeah, but you got some other. Well, I mean, if you look at anywhere, you're going to have this, a county tax on there, a state tax as well.
That was separated out. That isn't.
Take a look at it and see if there's something else that says a special tax that might have something to do with their convention center.
The convention centers usually have to get special legislation for any of those carve outs, so they have to go lobby the legislature to get any of those additional to go to those kind of projects. Roanoke just did that.
Roanoke?
To fund their convention center and those kind of things, they have to go to the legislature and get special cards. A lot of it also too includes rebates from the state's portion that goes with those projects, funding those projects.
So we could do that if we wanted a convention center? We lobby the legislature?
We could,
Yeah.
we could. Cedar Hill, I think, did, but then I think that got pulled, didn't it?
Yeah, and they're fighting it.
Yeah, theirs got approved in the last legislative session, this legislative session it got pulled.
We can grant it and then pull it?
Yeah, it's not a good thing because Cedar Hill's already building.
Yeah, it's kind of a gamble.
So on recreation fees, does that come through the park board?
The recreation fees, we will, I'll let Barb and Timothy talk about that. I mean, recreation fees, standard membership fees, you'll see all those when we bring to council our master fee schedules. All those things are spelled out there, but I'll let you guys talk about any anticipated increases, et cetera.
They did look at the fees this year and they recommended a 10% increase in the rental fees.
They being the park board?
Yes, sir.
So we don't, do we think that there'll be any pushback in terms of maybe less participation because the fees have gone up?
We don't think so.
Okay.
We thought we were undercharging previously based upon.
You look at area
We
cities
do
as
look at
well,
area
and
cities.
what they're charging.
Okay.
Okay, so on this slide, I wanted to just graph out what the, based on historical certified taxable value. And so I've layered that out. On the bottom in the green, you see our residential taxable value. It has been 67% of the values overall since about 2008 and hasn't really changed any. Our commercial and business personal property represent 33% of that total tax burden, or that total tax amount. So that's just a way of charting out how those values have performed as we've come out of the housing and property recession. Look at our total tax breakdown, the city of Duncanville. With our proposed half-cent reduction, we're at 25.5% of the total tax bill. I put an asterisk here that these are estimates. You know, we know what we're going to do. I don't know if any of the others are going to increase, decrease, but I took that off of DCAD, what they proposed for FY20, and so they may make changes as they go through and adopt their tax rates. But that's how we stand if everything stays as is. Graphically, that's how it looks. The independent school district, of course, takes up 52% of the total tax rate, and we take up 25%.
So the DISD percentage of the total, with all the legislation passed this past session, really didn't affect the percentage at all. We're still staying around 52% no matter what they do.
Well, I'm not sure exactly how that legislation is going to impact them. I haven't had a chance to talk to the superintendent about it. I was going to tonight. But they passed their budget for next year in June. So their tax rate, I think, is already set for the next year. And besides, I think the legislative funding doesn't kick in until next year anyway. So I think we'll see the school districts making changes, and I don't know how it's going to impact them yet, the additional state funding, but it won't take effect till next year. Anyway. So this year, yeah, it's still the same.
Okay.
And then the Dallas County calculates what the average single-family resident value is. So I've charted this out for the last 10 years from 2010 to the present. And so you can see those dramatic increases as we come out of excuse me, the housing recession. Excuse me. And then what I did here is calculated based on the changing tax rate over the years, the tax rate times that average value. So this is the average city of Duncanville only, not including school or county taxes, and how that's performed over the last 10 years. And then I took that daily cost, or made a daily cost calculation based on single-family residents, and I said, you know, how does that look? So I kind of stratified that out. I didn't go back and calculate we know our street maintenance was fairly minimal from 2010 to 2016, and then we started really working in 2017 trying to add more into street maintenance. And so if you look at that, 2019, we'll start there and kind of work our way back. The $3.07 is what that average single-family resident pays on a daily basis for all the services that they get. So all their costs for public safety, having streets, sidewalks, public library, all the amenities, $2.91, and then 16 cents of that would be dedicated to street maintenance based on the budget. And then in 2018, $2.67 and 12 cents, and then in 2017, $2.46 and 6 cents. So you can see that that's a fair percentage of that total amount. So just reiterate here on this screen that for $3.07, $92.10 a month, you get, you know, all your public safety and all your amenities, and it's about the same that most people pay for a monthly cable bill or cell phone plan. So as we noted, Kevin noted in the beginning, we did do analysis of our actual tax rate, and we did come in under the rollback rate, but as he pointed out, we were able to achieve the things that we needed and still lower a ½ cent. So with the ½ cent reduction, we're still last year our rate was less than 0.5%, and we're about 1.08% above that rollback rate. Below. I'm sorry, below. Thank you. Penny on the tax rate calculation, $250,000 is what a penny equates to based on our valuations. And so, you know, what kind of impact does that have on an average, that average value for a penny, which is an annual impact of $15 a year, or about $26 a month, or 4 cents on a daily basis. I also wanted to make the calculation to have some flavor, if you will, for what's going to happen next year when we go under the property tax cap. So what I did is I took our effective tax rate this year and made the 3.5% rollback rate calculation. And as you can see in the middle, the difference there between the rollback and us dropping the tax rate a ½ cent, we would have had to have lowered the tax rate an additional 3.3 cents in order to get under the rollback rate. And that would have equated to a reduction in revenue of about $825,000. And so that's the kind of impact that we can expect next year.
So if that holds true, we get an opportunity to weigh in on how we take away $826,000? If all of that holds true?
Yes.
Thank you.
And
We have some areas we can cut back in.
so things have changed since we went through when I went through the slide presentation. I lost the value for DeSoto out there. Sorry about that. don't know what's going on with the slide stuff. I will.
0.721.
Yeah, thank you. So I wanted to compare, you know, to Lancaster. They've pretty much been straight line all the way across at 86 cents per hundred, and then Dallas about currently at 77. They've been a little bit higher and lowered, and of course DeSoto's lowered, we're lowered, and then Cedar Hill has consistently been below all of us at 69 cents per hundred valuation. Here, what I did, this is always a good benchmark to look at some of the other cities in the West Southwest and take a look at what the residential tax value, if you break that down per capita, per person. And so you can see that our residential values are on the lower end of the spectrum, with only Lancaster being below us, and the other cities being well above us in terms of what that breaks down to on a per person basis. And then similar.
I'm sorry, our residential values, if you add them all up, you divide it by our population, that's what you get?
That's the taxable value divided by the population, correct?
Okay. Wonder what that would be per square foot. I'm just curious. Well, how much property per square foot?
That's their appraised value,
That's taxable value.
which is,
Yeah,
it's
right,
appraised,
it's
it's appraised value.
taxable value, right? To get to the square footage, Councilman Anderson, I'm not sure that we have that kind of information from DCAT. Would we be able to, they give you an average value, do they have an average square
Well, you'd have to
footage?
figure it.
They
You'd have to figure it out.
don't. All they do is they track things by parcels, because they can only track a residential parcel by parcel. They don't have area square footage.
No, you would have to figure that. You would have to figure that yourself. When I'm looking at property now, I mean, I can look at something that's, you know, how much it produces per acre in town. I mean, how much a commercial property produces per acre, one property versus another.
Well, I can ask the DCAT if somewhere back in the
I can figure it. Give me the square footage and the taxable value, I can figure it. I can do it. I do it all the time, so.
yeah.
I'll show you. Never mind. It's another conversation. But that may not be as bad looking as it appears. I mean,
Well, I don't
if
think
you
so.
figure per square foot.
Because it's what Dallas County has appraised it at.
No, it's not. It just has to do with the size of the tracks and stuff like that.
Right, but I don't think they're all necessarily fair or accurate.
Well, that's-
So this slide is doesn't necessarily paint a good picture. What I did is took the commercial, business, personal property inventories, if you will, taxable value, and divided it by the population. So you can see we're on the very lower end of the spectrum, meaning that our population, we don't have near as much business, economic development and business as these others.
Yeah, what we're trying to show here with both of these is essentially that, our valuations are lower than our surroundings. We don't have high commercial property values and business personal property taxes, and we don't have real high residential. And when you divide it by the per capita, then you're kind of putting it on a similar basis for comparison to show that this is our primary source of revenues. So what we're drawing our primary source of revenue from, that value, that tax base, on a per capita basis is less than our neighbors. And so we're providing these services based on a lower revenue source, if you will.
And they're essentially similar services. We
Right.
have to provide the same
And I think the
basis.
next slide will kind of show them
And
how that
DeSoto
ties together.
shot up with all those warehouses.
Right, the warehouses have added a lot of value. They have
They
a lot
were
of new,
flat.
they have a lot of new residential
Yeah.
construction that's valued more. And so that gives them more tax base, more to draw from on their tax values, and so they can reduce their tax rates based on that.
But then you add into there, we don't have the land.
Right. those are the challenges that we have, and
That's when you look at the value per square foot, because to deliver the infrastructure to those areas that are a lot bigger than us, it costs a lot more to deliver. And there's a lot of good information here that, I'm not thinking quick enough right now, but there's a lot of good information here that should direct us in our economic development policies and what we do to bridge these gaps and how much you put on the density on your existing infrastructure. So, and this is good information. This is,
Our land that's left is precious.
well, and what you do with the land that you have that's already built on, what you allow people to add on to, and other things. There's lots of other things you can do.
That bring in
Yes.
more revenue.
And we'll
Higher,
have less,
better use.
and then we'd have less infrastructure because we're only 11.2 square miles, where they're like 40 square miles.
Right.
So it's costing them more to deliver services.
Yeah, and what a joy it'll be when they bring in all those people at Redbird that will put more pressure on. I'm sure we'll have to share with fire and police and schools, and it will put it on risk.
So this slide that Kevin alluded to does show this is our total taxable valuations times the tax rate divided by the population. So this shows you how we compare to those other cities that, you know, our impact per person is much lower than those other cities.
for providing the same municipal, essentially the same municipal services.
The divisor is the full population, not just voting population, it's man, woman, and child.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but these are not that bad. These are actually good.
Well, that's what we're trying to tell you.
That's
This part is, I think, is a good story to say that we're providing these services at less taxes to our residents than
Right.
surrounding cities.
Means we're a lean city.
Right. We are, and we'll show you some more of those things, but
Because-
this is a mixed message. I mean, we'd love to have a higher valuation, but the fact is, we don't. But this part of it is what the good news is we're providing essentially the same services at a cheaper tax burden per capita than our surrounding cities. So we're trying to be efficient, trying to be lean, cost effective for our residents.
So I alluded to in the earlier slide, 63% of our costs are personnel costs. So that means that, just points out, highlights that as an organization, we're lean.
And the physical layout of the city may be more efficient than these others too. So there's other things. And there's lots of. We need to. I hope we remember this and can come back to it and look at it when we get to our other discussions about what our vision is, of what ought to go on these sites and how it works. We can pull these back up.
Okay, on sales tax history, we just mapped that out, how that's performed over time. So you see a pretty steady increase from 2011 all the way up through 2018, and now we're seeing a little bit of a reduction as we've lost some of this major business.
We've been trending down for a number of months here, as you probably have seen in the monthly sales tax reports that I send you. It's not been a huge amount, but it has been trending downward. We just got our sales tax numbers. You'll see them tomorrow when I send them out to you. We're essentially flat. I think we were up $5,000 or something, or $1,000 over last year. So this month we're flat compared to last year. I don't know if that's a bottoming out or if that's just an anomaly and we're going to keep trending down. So to be conservative, we have estimated that we will continue to trend down into next year.
Looking at the general fund expenditures by category, of course, our public safety takes up the majority at about 59% of the budget. And I'm sorry, 49%. And then public works, 20%, parks and rec at 11%, and general government and non-departmental costs at 10.1%, finance 4%. Other transfers and grant reserves, 3.2%, and then 1.3% transferred to the one-time project fund. Looking at the general fund expenditures, same exercise as before. I've compared the 19 adopted budget to the 20 proposed budget, calculated the increase, decrease, and then calculated what percentage that is. And then we'll again talk about some of the things driving those if everyone's ready to move to the next slide. So 8.5% increase on our general government non-departmental. We had increases in salaries that included a new IT position. We also had group insurance increases and other miscellaneous expenses that totaled $392,000. That were offset by some reductions in various expenditure categories and most notably IT replacement costs that totaled $128,487. 6.5% increase.
John, I'm going to stop you here real quick. And can you explain about the group insurance? Because it didn't increase, but it increased in the budget because of what we talked about in June. So if you would kind of mention that.
I'm going to let Jennifer talk more about that. She has a...
Well, basically, when we were going through the budget process last year, we just didn't have the correct rates reflected in the adopted budget. So we had to make up for it in the revised budget. So when you're comparing this year to last year, you're going to keep seeing that.
We talked about this quite a bit.
In June, you may remember we talked about that when we were showing the revised FY19 budget. We were talking about the insurance increases. It was because we had the wrong numbers in there. So now that we're comparing FY20 to FY19, you're still seeing those wrong numbers in FY19. So it's really not an increase in the group insurance cost to the city, but it is an increase in the budgeted numbers because we had the wrong numbers in FY19. Does that make sense to everybody?
So we made changes to assure that we have the right numbers moving forward.
And part of that was a switch from self-insurance to fully insured. That it's much more clear now. Okay, in finance, 6.5% increase, kind of the same thing. We had $112,000 increase in salaries, group insurance, and other miscellaneous expenses, and that was offset by reductions in other expenditures and IT replacement costs totaling $14,000. Parks and Rec, we had a 2.4% increase. Very much the same story with salary and group insurance, $140,000 increase. And that was offset by reductions in several expense categories that totaled $45,000. Police, 9.4% increase. They had their increase, as everyone else did, for salaries and group insurance, but they also had the new crime advocate position that was previously grant funded, but now has to be paid out of the general fund. They also had SWAT duty pay, and so all those things combined were $715,000 of that. And then they had other miscellaneous expense accounts that increased $142,000. Some of those notably were the animal shelter shared cost and the Southwest Regional Communications Center cost increase. And those were offset by IT reduction cost of $33,000 and reduction in travel expenses of $10,000. Public Works had an 8.7% increase. Very much the same story there, but part of their increase was for street maintenance of $150,000. And we also had to incorporate in our signs and signals the $238,000 that we lost from red light funds that previously we paid out of the red light fund. And then we had other various expense reductions of $44,809 and an IT replacement expense reduction of $17,000.
And that's just one line item, the 238. There's more to go along with that red light camera that we'll have to absorb somewhere else.
Well, the 238 were the things that were ongoing costs, and we'll talk more about the red light fund, the traffic improvement and safety. We paid we used that money to do a lot of projects, capital projects, and so we'll talk about that more. But this is the essential ongoing cost that we feel that we'll continue to see year after year. 5.3% increase in the fire fund. Similar story with the salary and group insurance increasing 383, and then an offset in various expenses, including the IT replacement fund and their fleet replacement for $29,000. So overall, we had a 7.2% increase. Then in the transfers and the the medical insurance fund, there was no change. It was the same as it was in the previous year. And the one-time project fund decreased 61%, and that's just simply based on our calculation of available fund balance that exceeded our targeted reserves. And then on the grant fund, $80,000 decrease. CDBG grants every 2 years, and so this was our off year. 20 would be our off year, so it went down by $80,000. And then we increased 53%, $18,000 on our reserve for the TIF fund, and that's based on increased property values within the TIF. And then of course, the new reserve for future costs for the P25 public safety radios, 350,000 increase there. And then the economic incentive grants, that grant.
Richard, hold on just a second. So we think now to become compliant with the radios, it'll be in circa $700,000.
What was that question, I'm sorry?
What, I don't remember the numbers what were the numbers y'all were estimating on just the radios?
Well, I think the maximum was 4,000 each. Is that correct, Mark? I don't remember that exact number, but where did we get that number from, Sam? Do you remember?
It depends on how many bands you get in that radio. It can range anywhere from 3,000 all the way up to 7,000, depends on how many bands. You get a single band, it can be anywhere from 3,000 to 4,000. You go with a dry band, it can be up to 7,000 per radio.
I don't remember the range. When we talked to y'all in June, we had a range in there, and I'm thinking it was around 700, 750 to over $1 million that we were estimating for the cost of the new radios. And that was not the operational costs of being on the radio system. That was just the capital cost for new radios.
Mr. Hugman, we're working, matter of fact, I've got a meeting set up for the police side of things next Monday. We're working very diligently to get a better grasp of that number. We obviously know the number of radios that we need, but when you buy the radio, you buy that as a base, and then you have to buy the extra battery, several options, whether you have a mic on it or it's just on your belt. So we're trying to zero in on that cost as diligently and as quickly as we can. So this is an estimation at this point. The 700,000, probably a good estimation from what I know at this point. And just so you know, the P25, to be compliant with that, the state is requiring that if we're going to have any future grant capability. And it makes us inoperable with other emergency service agencies throughout, our area. This will enable us to talk from west, from Fort Worth, on the east, probably up to just about Rockwall. So police and fire are in this together. It's a big expense, but it's something that is needed for inoperability and for the grant.
And you're working with the best Southwest cities as well to try to get the best cost
yes,
we
sir.
can.
And when we say it's the Dallas County, so Dallas County and the city of Dallas are working together to bring this up to speed. Tarrant County already has theirs, And when it's all done, this will be inoperable and connect to Tarrant counties. So again, we'll be able to have inoperability throughout.
So essentially, when we talk about P25, we're talking about coverage. We're talking about the ability to communicate with other police departments. So when we go into another jurisdiction, we're able to communicate with that particular police department.
So are there any ancillary costs in connection with acquiring this technology, software, and in terms of Southwest Regional Communications Center, don't they have to ramp up as well? And that'll be reflected in our share of the cost to them?
Yes, sir, and they are. And this is a collective effort between the reflective emergency responders as well as Southwest Regional. As far as, what was your other question? I'm sorry. The first part?
Ancillary software,
Yeah, so the good thing about this, partnering with Dallas, is we're not having to build and maintain the infrastructure of this radio system. So we're going to essentially lease our participation in that radio system. So we're buying the equipment that we're going to need, the radios and accessories, to make it work for us, but then we lease into their system. And that's going to be a monthly cost, and we have a figure on what that's likely going to be, and that's going to be obviously an ongoing cost.
I thought there were some tower costs when you guys first briefed us.
Again, that's the infrastructure, so they'll maintain that. When we do our lease, they're maintaining that, that's what we're, yeah.
So those towers could actually be in our city limits, but it's owned by Dallas, we're leased.
Yeah, they have tower coverage throughout the coverage area, and they're constantly putting those things up. I know they're looking at getting the council over at DeSoto to sign off to put a pretty large tower over there. They're in the works of doing that. I'm not sure where that is currently, but so I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, well, that's good. I'm sure we'll need to stay tuned because we haven't heard the end of it yet.
Sure, and obviously it's a very fluid situation, but we're doing the best we can to get those numbers, to drill down. We're still probably, I think it's the third or fourth quarter of 21 when it looks like it'll be up and running. We're hoping to get a little bit ahead of that, so we're ready for that. So we're working on that.
And we participated in a number of meetings thus far, and we will continue to do so. And that lease that Mark is referring to, we will have a prescription fee that will be charged by Dallas. And this is the best route for our city. It's the least expensive route because they're, as Mark indicated, they're putting all of this together. And we're just partnering with them. But there has been a number of meetings, and we'll continue to have those meetings. And we have a good estimate on what it could be, but that could fluctuate just a little bit as we begin to pull more layers back and know specifically what it's going to be.
Thank you.
And are y'all getting any grants on these?
Yes, ma'am. I believe Dallas has already applied for some grants.
I would think with what's going on right now that the feds would step in.
Currently, there are no grants for the police side of things. I think Chief Rohde, the fire side, may have some. So those go through the state. And so what's happened is back after 9/11, this was a big issue, interoperability with radios. And the state has moved on to allowing some of those types of grants for radios. Currently, to the police side of things at least, we don't have anything available that would go to radios.
I think we'd be better hitting them on a federal, seeing if we can't get our federal reps to help. Because now with all the stuff that's going on, they have to be able to talk to each other.
Well, P25 is federal
It is.
federal legislative requirements.
The point I'm making is even the federal grants work their way down through the state. And I guess maybe I misrepresented that when I said the state, but we don't have anything open to us. We've looked.
It goes through them?
Yeah, the state will administer
a lot of it.
Is,
it's very similar to like transportation grants. A lot of those grants that come from COG are actually funneled from the federal government through the state.
I knew the transportation was, but I didn't know about radios. But
Homeland Security grants.
you'd think now, because of all the were they internal terrorists? That
We've got our antennas up. If something comes up, we'll do our best.
And we talked to them though. We talked to them like Eddie Bernice. And,
If you know of something,
write
we
down
want
what
to
you
listen to.
need.
Sure.
Write it down.
But we do,
No, but we talked to them.
Right, and Representative Eddie Bernice Johnson's office does contact us periodically as well to ask us, or they'll let us know when there's grant opportunities. And so we do get information from her office on that. And certainly, next time when y'all are there in April then, in Washington DC, then we will make sure that's on your
I'll
list
see her
to
before
discuss.
then.
Okay.
I go to things that, she has little things that, even before she was our representative before redistricting. I was also friends with Kenny Marchant. We're losing him apparently. And so I was friends with her and I continue that. And she has people in her office that have certain designations that they work on. And if you tell us, but you need to write down what you want me to say.
We want more money.
Yeah, I got that part of it, but I mean, so I can be specific.
1.2 be exact.
Specific. Yeah.
Just write on a slip of paper.
You write out how much you want. Yeah.
Richard wants more money.
Yeah. Well, I got that.
Once we figure out, like I say, the better the cost, then certainly the city manager will be aware of that, and we can get that to you.
But we know it's a big ticket, and that's why we wanted to get out ahead of it, start reserving some funds in this year, so that it wasn't all hitting us at one time.
And obviously, if we got grants, we could really.
Yeah, and I think though you can tie it in now with the atmosphere and what's going on.
Well, we'll do our best.
And
It's above our pay
that was
grade.
my point, because now they have defined that we have terrorism on our own soil. So maybe they come up with some money.
So continuing on our incentive grants, economic incentive grants, the grant that we have to do forwards, it ends in January of 2020, so that's why that decrease there as it comes to its final payment. And then our loan that we borrowed the money to do the financing for the EON equipment, that's didn't change, and that was scheduled to end on our payments for 12/21. December of 21, sorry. So overall expenditures, 4.9% increase in the total expenditures. Okay.
We'll switch down to food this year.
Yes, that's good.
Food is here. We're about to go into a new section, so we might as well break down, because if you don't, food will get cold. So let's
That's
go ahead.
scary. What is it?
I thought you said it's cold in the room.
Yeah, we'll recess at 5:28.
All right, I'm going to be talking to you all about compensation. This first slide shows the number of citizens that each employee, the cities or benchmark cities and Duncanville serve. And you can see we're towards the high end, meaning that we're a very lean city, and our employees service about 155 citizens in 2019. Next slide is the average payroll for employees. So we're on the opposite end, and we're on the low end on this slide, meaning that on average our payroll per each employee is lower than our benchmark cities. This is a new slide that shows the turnover from fiscal year 2014 through 2019. The top line chart is for general employees. The blue one is for police, and the orange-red one is for fire. So for the top one, you can see it's pretty much a down, up, down line chart. And generally for general employees, it's an economic factor or market changes that determine when general employees leave us. For police, you see we had an increase between fiscal year 16 and 17 for turnover. That was predominantly due to retirement and people just not wanting to be police officers anymore. It's been on the downward side since then. And for fire, we had an increase during 15 and 16. and then been on the downslide since then. For fire, they don't leave us for other cities. Usually, they just, they do leave us for other cities. They're not moving because of the salary. So for them, I'm sorry, so they are leaving us for the salary to go to different cities. It's not so much that they're staying and retiring with us.
And of course, Todd, from this point forward, when you have the abbreviation for FTs, that's equivalent to full-time employees?
Yes.
And so would you define for everybody an
No,
equivalent?
I'm sorry, not on this chart. These are full-time employees. We are not, he does have information on part-time employee turnover. We don't put it in here because that's very, that's very difficult to, it'll skew everything. These are actual full-time employees. True
Right.
full-time.
And with the part-timers, so many of them are seasonal that you're really going to see such a high increase in those.
My point is, when we begin talking about equivalent full-time employees, it's going to be identified as FTs, or it's going to be EFTs, or whatever you're going to use?
FTE.
FTE, full-time
Full-time
equivalent.
right.
Full-time equivalent,
Yes.
okay.
Okay, so this year, like other years, we did a salary survey with our benchmark cities. This is the high-level aggregate view. We used 60 positions of our positions. 51 of those are general employees, exempt and non-exempt, and then 9 public safety positions. And from a high level, looking at the minimum and maximum salary ranges, you can see that we are under for the min and max in almost all cases.
You said 50?
There's 51 on the top 51 positions, and for general employee positions, and then 4 police and 5 fire. Okay, I showed you these slides back in June, but I'm going to go through them again very quickly. These are snapshots based on 2019 data, and keep in mind that all of our other Best Southwest and other cities are going to be doing increases this year for police and fire. We don't know exactly what those are going to be yet, but this is just based on the data that we had when we conducted the survey. So for police officer, first I list the min and max for our pay plan for police officer, and then you can see for our benchmark cities, their min and max, both average and median, are higher than ours, as are their, for the Best Southwest, we're 1 out of 4, but for the benchmark cities, we're 12 out of the 15 cities. So we're doing well for police officer in the Best Southwest, but we rank rather low within our benchmark cities. For police sergeant, it's the same thing. We're 11 out of 15 with benchmark, and we're 1st out of 4 with the Best Southwest. For police lieutenant, 9 out of 14 for benchmark, and 1 out of 4 for Best Southwest. And for assistant police chief, we're 6 out of 15 and 1 out of 4. So we fare better with the assistant chief position for police.
Is anyone at, do you have anyone at max though, or does?
Do we have anybody at max? Yes.
So what do you?
So what happens is they go through their automatic steps each year, and when they reach, for police officer, for example, they reach step 7 and then they're maxed out. So there's many police and fire, depending upon their tenure, that do max out.
So what do you do then?
So like this year, when we're proposing the 4% increase for police and 5% for fire, we adjust the whole pay plan, so the minimum and max is adjusted accordingly. So then they're still maxed out, but they've gotten an increase nonetheless.
Number of, this may not be your area, but how, do we compare like numbers of officers and firefighters per population?
I haven't done that.
Do we have, if we have more than, these are their salaries, but do we have, we have like 10, do we, with 40,000 population, how many police officers do we have? Yeah,
So
with the other cities have 40,000, like DeSoto's about the same size, how many officers do they have?
DeSoto has more officers than we do. They have more population. So there's different thumb rules. And there is a thumb rule that is number of officers per 100 population. That's not necessarily true because it depends on what your call volume is and stuff too. So we have not done that part of the study to look at, well, where should we be? I do think, and the chief and I have talked about this before, we believe that we need more police positions. But right now, we haven't been able to fill what we have. So there's not really any point in adding new positions if we can't fill the ones we've got right now. So, but I do think as our call volumes increase and so forth, it is something that we will need to look at some point and determine. I don't know if you have anything else to add, Chief.
No, I think you said it well. We are not the largest police department, and as Mr. Huckman said, what we hope to do once we become full staff, we want to see if we're able to handle our call load efficiently based on that number. When you begin to try to determine staffing, you look at a number of different things, and you want to look at the discretionary time is really the data that you want to look at, and that's the downtime that the officers are not responding to calls. And so you pull that information from your CAD and RMS system just to determine that. And we'll get to that point when we need to.
Okay. So for the fire positions, it's pretty much the same. I'll go through them quickly. For firefighter/paramedic, we're 13th out of 14 for benchmark and 2nd out of 4 for Best Southwest. Fire engineer driver position, 11 out of 14, and then 2 out of 4. Fire captain, we're 14th out of 15 for the Minimax, and then 3rd out of 4th for the Best Southwest. And that's the same for the battalion chief, so you see we don't fare as well in these two positions within the Best Southwest. And then for assistant fire chief, we're 5th out of 15 and 1 out of 3 for the Best Southwest. So based on all of our analyses, of our studies, we're proposing to do a 4% plan adjustment increase for police and a 5% pay plan adjustment for fire at all steps. And like we talked about, and Kevin mentioned earlier, this will change their pay plan so that even the minimum and the max will adjust. Basically what we were just talking about. So even new firefighters, new police officers coming in will get the higher amount. And those who are maxed now, they'll still get their increase, but be maxed out when we do the adjustment.
They'll be maxed out in their adjustment.
So they have reached their top step.
Right.
So because we're changing the whole pay plan, and that top step is still increasing by 4 or 5%, they're still going to get an increase, but they won't get any more annual increases on steps. The only increases they will get is if we change the pay plan again each year.
And that's what you're doing, you're changing.
Yes, sir.
each year.
Yes.
Okay.
Sure. Okay. General employees, we're proposing a 3% increase across the board, and then that's the fund breakdown for full-time and part-time employees. All right, so new positions that are proposed for fiscal year 20 is crime victim advocate, as we've mentioned a few times. This was a grant-funded position prior to going into the new fiscal year, and the grant funds have gone away, so we're going to make this a general fund position. The total cost will be $58,000, and this position is in the police department and provides crisis counseling, short-term counseling, information and referrals, support and advocacy, liaison for crime victims and their families. Second one is the economic development intern. This is for $12,330. As I believe Kevin mentioned earlier, we have third-party vendor databases for property management. There's actually 2 of these databases that economic development is currently utilizing that cost them about $15,000 per year. So this intern is going to be responsible for building or creating a new database so that those costs will go away in the future. We'll have our own internal database to manage all of that.
So when that database is built, this internship goes away?
I would defer that to Ms. James.
Heather, is that possible? Yes.
They would also, I mean, the database is going to have to be continually updated though and to be current. So there's going to always be work.
There's maintenance required of the database.
That's correct.
Perhaps they wouldn't work as many hours per year.
But how many hours?
Robert, you know, an intern who really needs insurance, no benefits.
Because they're not full-time, aren't they?
Right, this would be a part-time position, somebody who's in school, who has the requisite skills and who wants some real-life experience. Somebody who is in school in the field that has a requisite experience and skill set could come in and do this, and really they would do it as part of their studies.
Okay, so just a project, okay.
Yes.
And the crime victim advocate, is that part of a block grant?
Right now?
No, it was.
What grant is that?
Yes.
The crime victim advocate?
Yes, we were very fortunate that we was able to fund this position for at least 10 years, has it been?
Yes.
Yeah, and the grant is going away.
What kind of grant was it?
Was it?
It's the VOCA grant.
The
It's
what?
the Victims Advocate Grant. It's a VOCA grant. And we have had it for 10 years. Initially, I was the administrative lieutenant when we got that grant. Technically, I think we've had it for longer than the state really initially planned on it by some time. I think it was initially we would have it for 3 years, and then we would be expected to bring that into, as we're trying to do here, a full-time position. But, you know, that's a huge thing to our victims. There's some mandated things that somebody at our department has to do that. And for the last 10 years, we've had this person who's been funded through the grant. Previous to that, we had somebody else having to wear another hat, and it just wasn't done very well, or to the point that it could be.
And it's just not available anymore.
No, they're not. They told us they're not going to fund that for us anymore.
We were also funding a part-time position out of that grant as well. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
the part-time position, she worked, the lady that was working in that position worked about 5 hours a week on average. So we're actually proposing not to do anything with that, not to bring her on or keep her on, since it was such a minimal expense and she was doing minimal work for us. We feel like that we can do that with this employee being full-time. And
Do we have somebody full-time writing grants, asking for them?
As a general grant writer, no. That's handled within each individual department.
Is there a reason why I get emails all the time talking about learning how to request grants?
I know, it's something that,
I know.
we considered it, we've talked about it. I know some places have someone that's just dedicated to writing grants. You know, but what we would want to do is to make sure that it paid for itself in the grants that we get. And so right now, we've had other needs that we felt were higher priority, we haven't done that. But we do, as Todd said, some of the different departments, especially the ones that typically do grants. I know Lacey Freeman in Fire is very well versed in getting grants. Chastity in Planning has done a number of grants. And so we had, and the library has some experience in applying for grants. So we have some different people that do that. There's also businesses, companies that do that, and will do that for you. And there too, we've talked to some of them. I haven't been convinced yet that we needed to do that. So, but it is something we let.
They're trying to get us to, aren't they?
They send
I get emails to them.
Sure, because you go to NLC and
Yeah.
TML, and you're going to get your badge scanned, and you're going to get the emails from them.
Right. I've taken the course.
Well, so write us some grants, baby.
So-
You took the course? Did you graduate?
I think so.
Were you the top of your
We
class?
don't know yet, go to grant yet.
Let's try them out.
I got my shingle.
Got a computer over there. You can go.
Yeah, get after
Tell them
it.
about
You
the
took the
grant.
class.
Just as a thought though, in terms of we've lost that particular grant, but I know the county is really putting an emphasis on mental health with that location of that new clinic that's coming in southwest corner near Lancaster. Is there any possibility that Health and Human Services has some grants for this type of position versus where it used to come from before? Because, you know,
They probably want the money.
well, if we can tie this emphasis that's going on mental health with this particular position, it might be a link to get some money from somewhere other than where we used to get it, you know, Health and Human Services.
So each police department and even the district attorney's office, we're required to have somebody that addresses victims assistance. You know, partnerships are out there all the time. If there's something that we can do in partner with somebody, we're always open to that. I don't know if that would be the fit we'd be looking for this particular grant.
I'm just looking at another source of money.
Sure.
As a partnership, just somewhere else to get some cash.
Well, and we're always open to that. We typically see our grants come in through COG, and you know, the city manager mentioned the different departments that have someone that are actively looking for grants. We also have a position over there. One of our administrative lieutenant looks over the grants and assesses what's out there and what we can apply for. She also wears a number of different hats, so we're doing our best.
Okay, continuing on, our next new position proposal was for Network Systems Administrator. The importance of this position is, as you know, we moved to Munis system this year, which is a new ERP system, not only for finance and for budget, which helped us greatly for this budget year, but also for HR and payroll. We're continuing to implement new modules within both finance and HR, and now IT is leading the way for the public safety ERP within Munis. Sorry? Parks, I'm sorry. Public Works, what did I say? Public Works. So that's going to be a long and arduous project, which IT is going to be immersed in, along with Public Works. So this position would be responsible for system and network administration for the entire city, which includes all of our public safety IT needs. Support all server, storage, network operating systems, email, and data center support, and also provide additional resources to protect the city and citizens from cyber attacks and possible infiltration. And as you'll see on the next slide, that is a huge number that's been pretty stagnant every single year. That takes up a lot of time of the IT manager's life and takes him away from other work, like these other projects, which there just won't be enough time for. And these cyber attacks can cost not only thousands of dollars, but we know what kind of negative media we could get from those if we have a breach in our security.
You all may have seen I think probably about a month ago, there was an article in the paper about a city on the East Coast that had ransomware, and they were demanding $60,000 or something like that to release the data. And I think just about a couple of weeks ago, Chief Brown, you sent out a security alert message from your networks about hackers that are trying to hack into public safety systems and then hold that data with ransomware. So it's a serious thing. We're not going to ever be 100% secure, but we recognize that this is a major issue, and we're trying to do everything we can, Tracy and his team, to keep our networks secure. But one bad security breach, because we're not paying attention, can be very embarrassing and could be very damaging as well, not only to the city but also to citizens, because we have a lot of information. So it is a big thing.
So as a support or justification for this position, this chart is a bottom-up depiction. So the bottom is 2015, it goes into the current year. And I'm just going to highlight a few of these. The dark blue is the cyber attacks, and you can see that goes all the way across. So those are exponential every year, and they take up a great deal of time for the IT department. The second one is the light blue, which is the server responsibilities. So with every new technical software that we get, it runs the risk for more servers that are needed. The more servers that you have, the more support you need for those. And then the last one I'm going to highlight is the help desk, which is the green line. And you can see that that's over doubled since 2015, where it was about 100 in 2015, and it's up to 250, so it's more than doubled today. And with all these new systems that we're getting, and the employees utilizing all these systems, IT is getting a lot of support need for the employees for systems.
Question.
Yes, sir.
Tracy, tell us a little bit about the help desk and how that works.
So the way that comes into us is that the users out in the field, they will send an email through a system. It's a ticketing system. It's just an email to help us, and that tells us what the problem is. And I get those, I review them, I assign them, and we rank them based on we give them priority basically, so they get triaged. Then you guys go out and they help whoever needs help with whatever the problem is. So, a lot of it these days has been Munis related, so, which is expected because it's new. People are still getting used to it. We'll expect an increase with the public works implementation as well. And with with any other future things that we might add to our software needs. We'll expect to increase that as well.
So do you all have an internal standard in terms of response time, given the level of priority of the ask?
I don't necessarily have a policy in place, but our internal policy for us is that police and fire always come first because it's a public safety need. So, and then after that, outside of police and fire, if somebody's machine is down, then they take on that next highest priority, and it just kind of goes there.
Unless it's a payroll week.
Unless it's a payroll week. He's got a point. He's got a point there. So,
Just say that's part of safety.
It is part of safety.
For HR.
I think that's mental
HRs,
health.
ITs, city manager safety, yeah. So it's just, we try to take a common sense approach to it on what would have the most impact is for something being down and to get it back up.
Okay. Next, reclassifications and other compensation changes. There are a few reclassifications being considered or proposed for you all. These are based on internal equity, recognizing the duties that are performed. Some jobs have changed over time, and also market changes. As we mentioned in June, we're proposing a SWAT training duty stipend, and this would be for police officers and fire medics who are on call and part of our SWAT team. As you know, we implemented an on-call stipend last year for public works and utility billing people. This would be similar to that because SWAT team members are on call all the time. And this would also cover some of their training costs. And the total cost of this program would be $47,000 and some change. And they would receive a monthly amount of money in their pay.
So you're saying $150 a month all the time?
Correct. Because they're constantly on call. So they're putting their lives on hold essentially, or have to drop everything.
Trust me, I understand AT&T.
Oh.
They're on call.
Okay. So for TMRS, the Texas Municipal Retirement System, which is our pension system, there's no benefit changes proposed. However, the city's contribution amount will go up in January, and that'll go from 7.65% to 7.67%. And that's all I have.
One more question. So I think I asked this question before, but I just want to ask it again. So in terms of the retirees and a cost of living increase for the retirees, when was the last time that we did that?
2017.
I think it was for, yeah, it was, or
16?
yes, no, it was 17 because we were considering doing it in 2020. And we did not have the annually repeating cost of living adjustment for retirees. When we talked to y'all in June, that's one of the options within TMRS that each city chooses. Duncanville got rid of that some years ago, and it's not been brought back, that annually repeating, and it's a combination of cost of living adjustment for retirees and what's called updated service credits for existing employees. Those two things go together. So we did an ad hoc adjustment for 2017, but the cost to go to annually repeating is pretty high. What we had hoped to do was to be able to do it every few years to get us closer to that point that we could afford to go back to annually repeating. We're the only city within our benchmark cities that does not have that provision. But when we looked at it, for this coming year, we decided that we could not afford it, and we did not propose it.
Well, Dennis Schwartz just made me promise that I would bring it up.
Yes.
I continue to carry the torch.
Okay.
Every year.
Duly noted. Yes, he would bring that up every year.
You've done your duty.
Thank you. I'll
Thank
text
you
him
all.
and let him know. and got the usual response.
Okay, so we're going to talk about the one-time project fund. So this year, the money that we want to move into the one-time project funds, we're going to go toward purchase of Laserfish software for $29,185. That'll help for electronic records management, and it'll have OCR full document search and a public portal that'll be attached to that. We're looking at facility upgrades. This will be year 4 of our phased upgrades. The next things up are Lions Park Fire Station number 2 and the field house. These are primarily security camera upgrades. The City Hall chiller number 1 refurbished for $44,000. We're going to do a complete refurbishment of that chiller, and it'll come with a new 5-year warranty, and that's pretty good for a 13-year-old unit. Then we also have $50,000 dedicated to park outdoor fitness equipment, $25,000 for a new LED panel Christmas tree, and then $20,000 for LED lighting at Armstrong Amphitheater. We're also going to replace our old underground fuel tank with an above-ground tank out at the service center, and the old tank's reached its end of useful life, and so that's $141,000 to replace that, and all total $425,662. So then we'll move right into the utility funds. So what I've done here is mapped out for the last 10 years what our utility fund balance history has looked like. So you can see in the columns that are in blue are the years where we had rate increases, and then the other years in green we did not. And so we began reserving for AMI in fiscal year 17 at $1.5 million. You see that on the kind of gray purple area there at the top. And based on the information we got when we visited other cities and some analysis I did that I talked to you all about in the June workshop, I actually got the information from a couple cities that implemented AMI, and I was able to calculate on a per meter basis what each one of them, what their costs were. And there was quite a variety of differences in that cost per unit, because some of these entities were a bit larger than us. And so I kind of took a middle ground number there in the middle, and that's how I calculated the $5 million. And we think that based on what we saw that Cedar Hill did, we think that this will be adequate.
So we did talk to Cedar Hill and another city?
We did not talk to another city yet. We went and visited with Cedar Hill. We really went there for a couple things. We wanted to have some contacts and to find out some of the things that they learned, lessons learned, so to speak, in their implementation. And we also got some cost information because I was interested in what they had to spend.
That whole city had a smart meter?
I believe so.
Yes.
Yeah.
They're all use smart meters throughout the city.
I need to test it out. Okay. No, I have a home in City Hill. I haven't tried it.
Okay, and so same exercises I did in the general fund for the utility fund. I compared the 19 adopted budget to the 20 proposed budget, calculated what increases and decreases there were, and then calculated the percentages for you. And I think we mentioned before, you have all the slides printed out for you to take home with you. And so not a whole lot of changes on water revenues. I pretty much look at the trend analysis of what's happened on actuals from the previous year and made some minor adjustments, 6% up on residential water sales, 4.2% up on multifamily, 3.8% up on commercial. And then on our sewer, very little change there. I did increase the commercial sewer service a little bit by about $50,000, again, based on looking at prior year actuals. And then, again, an increase, quite a bit of an increase on interest on investments. And that's due to our cash management and the interest rates that are prevailing.
What happened to you telling us about the prudent?
Prudent cash management.
But we'd like to hear you say that.
Right, it's because of rising interest rates and the finance department's prudent cash management.
Richard, quick, help me remember, where are the revenues for the non-permeable surface wastewater runoff?
They go into the drainage fund, and we're going to talk about that a little bit.
Is that subordinate? Is that nested under utility or
No,
its own?
no, it's a fund to itself.
Drainage fund. Drainage, okay.
And so then penalties, based on the trends we saw, people are paying less penalties. They're doing a little better job of keeping their utility bills paid. And so I decreased that.
On that too, you mentioned that earlier today when we were talking about it, but I just now thought of something. Do you think maybe that has to do with our, they can now call in their payments or something using the phone services? Do you think that's had an effect on that, people paying on time?
I believe that it has. We continue to see a larger portion of people paying online and using credit card to pay. And I think, as we offer those alternatives where people don't have to come up here to actually pay, that it helps. That convenience factor is huge. So, yes. So overall, about a 2.7% increase in revenues for the utility fund. And then same exercise did on the utility fund, so you can see what the increase decrease is in each of the areas. You'll see that we have kind of 4 areas in our expenditures. We have our utility accounting, which is utility billing department, and then we have the utility administration, which is really Greg Ramey's area over in Public Works. They're part of water, wastewater, and then we have the water services and the wastewater services area, and then we have the transfers and the debt service.
A couple of things, one of which might actually be for Greg, and that is, do we have a sense of time or time frame in which AMI would be installed? How long would it take?
Actually, that's a Paul question, and
I'll let there yet for me to address that. So, to answer your question, we're working to just get as much information at this point. So I think when we look at the AMI system, we're looking at it from several components. Number one would be the software that we would implement within UB. Right now, we're using a legacy software, so that would be replaced. We would also want to make sure that that software would be compatible to our ERP system. We want to be able to talk, and so whether we go with a Tyler product or some other product, we want to work within our ERP framework. The second part would be the software that we would allow not only for UB to look at usage, but also that would have a portal for residents to be able to look at their water usage. And so we're looking at that again, making sure that that would be compatible to that software. And the third component is understanding where we are with our meters. And so we've been purchasing meters that should be ready to be converted over to an AMI system, meaning what will the registers that measure that usage work for the meters we have. So we're trying to get an appreciation of the 13,000 roughly meters that we have in the ground. How many of those can be converted to an AMI register and put online, or are some of those meters going to have to be replaced? And if we replace them, are we going to stick with the same type of meter or another different meter? And the fourth will be if there has to be communications infrastructure network that has to be put in place that would have the meters that would then relay, connect, and transfer that information to ultimate back to UB. Those are the things that we're looking at to make sure that as we kind of put together the scope and the spec to go out on the street to get that. So as far as implementing it, I think what we also want to look at is phasing it in. if I were to say we could spend $5 billion now, Richard would kill me, because he'll show in a later slide that it will take us, we'll dip below our reserve, number of days reserve that we have for that fund, so we don't want to do that. And I think we will be able to phase it in overall, but we're really wanting to understand our system first. So my hope is that in the next several months, we can come back to council, now that when we have a handle of the overall system, and say, here's what this looks like. And then as we start phasing in, it might be the software. And that software implementation might take 6 months. Then at that time, we may then begin to turn over, have a portion of the meters and convert those to smart meters while we're bringing the system. But I think we're still talking about at least a year or two overall implementation.
So in looking at the inventory of meters that's already in the ground, is there a certain manufacturer of meters that we have in the ground that we have, and if, because there are different companies, master meters, what have
Yes, sir.
you. So, and if we have a predominance of, let's say, a certain kind of meter, then in terms of making the final decision, will we consider that particular manufacturer, given the fact that if we already have a lot of their meters, and let's say, and I don't know this, I'm just throwing this in, let's say that their meters, the recent meters that we're buying from this company are already set up to be a part of AMI, then will we weigh in that factor in terms of the ultimate decision? Because as you mentioned, the conversion costs are going to be a factor, and if we get somebody and we've got to replace all of the meters, that would tend to me to be a little bit more expensive than, okay, we've got, hypothetically, these master meters out here, the newer ones are already set up. All we got to do is go out there, drop in this piece, they're good to go, and the overall cost of acquiring and implementing the system would be less.
Absolutely. And what we're finding, again, we're doing a lot of the data gathering and asking the questions of certain vendors and so forth. What we're finding is, what we would like to do is find a register that would be universal, that could fit with whatever meter. So if we start having a problem with one meter, we're not going to be held hostage, if you will, with that one particular meter. So we're finding, what we're looking for is a register, the piece that you would pop into the meter that could go and be used with a master meter or a Neptune meter or a deal meter or what have you. That's what we're kind of aiming for. To your point, which the question I think is, we need to find what that break point is of the number of the meters that we have. We use master meter right now. Of the number of master meters that are in the ground, which one of those can just pop, we can pop on the register and keep those. We don't have to replace those at all, other than just the cost of the register versus what percentage are we going to have to then switch over. The question then becomes, do we have to use a master meter product, or can we use another meter, or a different type of meter? We think we can use a different type of meter. And I'm not totally sure, as we're going through this, it may not be a bad option to have. If we start running into one and we're all in with one particular meter, could pose a problem. But if we have a register that's universal, it could work for any one of them. And there's one other quick component too. We're really talking about your smaller, anything less than an, or less than an 1.5 meter size would be residential. We also have a number of commercial meters that we're having to look at too, which kind of complicates that as well. And so that's another component as far as, to your point, obviously a much more expensive replacement cost for that meter, those larger meter sizes, 2 inch above versus the small residential meter.
So, and as Paul said, we're doing a lot of the data gathering right now, in Public Works and Finance. We're going to come back with a schedule. But the other thing that I've asked them to do is, I want to see the schedule as well for Public Works, because we're needing to implement the Public Works ERP system. So they're trying to mesh those two things together, recognizing what our resource limitations are when it comes to IT and the other staffs. So they're working on that, and we're going to try to implement those, both of them, but it's going to be a lot of work. So
fun times.
Tracy can handle it. Just suck it up.
Thank you.
So moving into explanations on utility accounting, there really were similar things that drove up the cost there. Salary group insurance for $48,000 and a multitude of different line items that increased another $36,000. The utility admin increased 12.7%. Again, primarily salary group insurance, but they also had some line item increase that are several line items that aggregated $32,197, and the biggest part of that was professional engineering services for $20,000. Under the water services, our salary group insurance increased $34,000. In there, we did reclass a vacant maintenance worker to an admin assistant in the solid waste, so that helped to drive that 2.2% decrease. Other line item expenditures decreased overall about $68,000. As Mark asked earlier about did we have water rate increases, we did. Dallas Water Utilities, there's as you all know, we have two components. We have a variable component and demand component, and that demand guarantees that we get X number of gallons of water. I think it's up to 9.5. It's 9.5 now. Well, I guess I'm including the Cedar Hill thing in there. I think, yeah, we have the guaranteed demand that we pay for, and that is a fixed cost that we have to pay whether we use any water or not. And then the variable cost is based on how many gallons we actually buy. So the variable cost increased 3.2%, and that demand cost increased 0.8%. But the reason that water services went down is that was offset by our second year of SRA credit. That's the Sabine River Authority credit for $226,000 that we're getting. So then on wastewater services, salary group insurance increased $53,000. And then we had other various costs in aggregate of $775,000. Most all of that really was for our TRA costs, and that was based on increased flows. I talked about that a little bit earlier, that we increased our estimate for flows. We were very close this last year, a little bit too conservative, and we ended up, we do a settle up after they finish their audit each year at the TRA plants. We primarily use 10 Mile Creek, but we also use a little bit of wastewater going up to Central. And so each year as they complete their audit, they look at their cost and the revenues that they collected from the cities, and we do what we call a settle up. If there's excess funds, and typically there are excess funds, and we get a refund of some sort back to us. But this year we had to pay a little additional money because we were a little too conservative with our flow estimates.
When you're conservative with your flow estimates and you have to pay the overage, is there a penalty?
Richard, also didn't because we had them come in and give the briefing in the June workshop, but they also talked about their increasing costs for capital improvements, right? So are we seeing that in these increases too?
We are. We're seeing them have to issue debt to finance their capital improvements because especially with 10 Mile Creek, a lot of that collection system going out there is getting in that 50 to 60-year-old range, and a lot of it's starting to fail. And so they've got a number of projects that they've been working on, and a number of things, retrofitting the plant out there. They're going away from the old type of sludge, dewatering type process to go into an ultraviolet light process that we think ultimately down the road we will see the benefits of a lower cost from, but you know, up front we're having to help finance.
Who regulates them?
Who regulates TRA? To some degree the PUC does, but the TCEQ is the primary regulator.
I was going to say, so no.
Yeah.
I meant more in terms of how they keep going up on
They have,
municipality.
well, Trinity River Authority has a board and an executive director, but we also they have regular meetings with their customers. And so Richard and Jackie Colton
Yeah, I knew
routinely,
they did.
and they review those budgets and they ask questions of them. So we're part of that process. But,
Yeah, basically, they justify to, they call it an advisory committee, and they have to justify their budget each year to the advisory committee, and then the advisory committee has a chance to, actually has to vote on that, just like you vote on our budget to pass, that advisory committee votes on their budget.
And when you challenged it before and it went to a judge, that was just a group of you?
I'm
On
not
the
sure.
cost?
That might have been DWU, huh?
When the judge said they'd overcharged and,
I think you're referring to the Sabine River Authority. And that was a lawsuit that Dallas Water Utilities got into with the Sabine River Authority a few years ago. And what that had to do with was Sabine River Authority wanted to dramatically increase their cost of raw water to Dallas Water Utility for the lakes, because Sabine River Authority owns the raw water, the lakes, the reservoirs, and Dallas Water Utilities bought water from them. Sabine River Authority went up significantly on their raw water costs. Dallas Water Utilities ended up taking them to court. The administrative law judge at the time then ruled that Dallas Water Utilities had to go ahead and pay those increased costs, but they put them into escrow. So that's why we were paying extra during those years until that lawsuit was settled. When the lawsuit was settled, it compromised on some value on the new raw water costs, but because we had escrowed in more money than what that ended up costing, that's what that credit is now. We paid in like 3 years, and they're going to credit us back that amount over a 3-year period against their normal increases.
We received a credit in fiscal year 19, and this will be our second credit in 20.
you just want to make sure that you have somebody who hears you when they just come up with costs on everything. So the Public Utilities Commission is also.
Well, and I also sit on the rate review committee for Dallas Water Utilities, and so does Jackie. And what we do is they actually do an internal annual study, and about every 10 years they hire Black and Beach to do a cost study, very similar to our cost of service study. And so we're about every 10 years we get to see how close they are, and they've never been very far off.
Really?
They're pretty close with their calculations, being on target. So.
Well, it's going to get worse.
So a lot of costs are being driven by TCEQ regulations, both on the water and the wastewater side. I mean, especially on the wastewater side, the treatment now, the quality that you have to treat wastewater to continues to rise. And so that just means more treatment costs, more new technologies, as Richard said, and all of that has a price tag. So yeah.
It's an unfunded mandate.
Unfunded mandate, that's correct.
So moving down into the other section outside of operating expenditures, our debt principal is going to decrease $68,000 in interest, 68%, and interest 80% because we're making our last payment on the bonds that we issued to do the infrastructure out at Joe Pool Lake in February of 2020. So we get to write another one off. Transfer to the general fund, and the pilot stands for payment in lieu of tax. If a third party were running our water utility, they would be having to pay a franchise tax to the general fund, and that's what the pilot tax is. And so those again are based on transfer rates that are recommended in the study. But as I mentioned earlier, I'm below that recommended rate. And so overall, our expenditures increased 3.6%. This is the trend on our water consumption that the Public Works folks put together for us. And that shows from fiscal year 2006 up to 18 what our costs have been. And you can see that for the most part, there's been some kind of a general downward trend, especially if you look at the 15, 16, 17 years, a dramatic decrease. Water conservation, we've had pretty decent rains during those years. We're 18, we saw a little bit of an increase back up on water usage.
So for the foreseeable future, infrastructure maintenance and water and sewer will be done on a pay-as-you-go basis?
Pay as you go in terms of, yes, what we're doing in terms of not needing to have any bonds to do work. Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
We don't anticipate going for any bonds.
That's correct. All right.
And so if we look at the ended fund balance, as I talked about in the very beginning, 6.4 million, that's 122 days of fund balance. It's about twice what our target of 60 days is. But I want to go ahead and show the calculation. If we did spend that $5 million for the AMI project, that would bring us down to 1.4 million, which is a 28-day fund balance. And as Paul talked about, we don't anticipate that we would spend that all in 1 year. It'd probably be spread out over a couple of years. But I just wanted to show you that calculation so that you understand the impact. Okay, moving to solid waste. Same exercises I've showed you before. I'm calculating the increase and decrease and what those percentages are for both revenues and for the expenditure side. And then we'll move into talking about that. The residential garbage collection fees, I've increased that 32%, and that's based on my model of our revenues with an increase of $4.50 for the curb pickup and $5 for the alley pickup. And then also in the commercial collection, an increase of $5 for the hand pickup, and then the increase in interest rate. So then on the solid waste expenditures, 34%, that's primarily been driven by two things. The new Republic waste contract, what we're estimating to be paying out on that, and then some additional $100,000 for landfill cost. On the litter control, 10.7%, 25,000 increase. Salary group insurance increased 20,000, and then other aggregate expenditure line items for 4,000. So the transfer to the CIP, capital improvement for alley repairs, there is no change. That's the same as it was in the previous year. 43,000 increase to the general fund, and again, that's based on a formula in the increased revenues, and then no change on the amount of the medical fund. So what I wanted to do is show you that with that increase that you all gave us direction on, the $4.50 and the $5, what I project is that at the end of fiscal year 20, we're going to be at a 26-day fund balance. And the recommended target is 60 days. And then I went ahead and modeled out fiscal year 21. And as you can see, that net profit or loss, we're going to continue to draw down on that fund balance. And we'll be at about 4 days of fund balance at the end of fiscal year 21. So we will have to anticipate another rate increase very quickly.
I had talked to you before, and I don't know if this is a good time to talk about it or not, but I think that we ought to look into, we have a truck here, I know we have one, but that picks up like limbs and brush and chips, and we used to, it drove around all the time, continuously, and did that. In fact, a lot of us, I told them they could use my house. They would, rather than having to come back and dump it, they would chip it and leave it there. And then I told the neighbors, you can come pick up however much you want. And different people did that. And we didn't have constant brush sitting everywhere, and we didn't have to pay someone to come in and get it. And we had talked about whether there were employees to run it or what, but I think we ought to look at that since we are a tree city, and it's going to be constant. It's not going to go away. And this is costing, and that's also recycling. Because we have a tremendous erosion problem. So you would be killing two birds with one stone, helping us with erosion and have continual pickup, chipping, and leaving it there.
Do we still have that truck?
We have a brush truck, but that brush truck is used for our crews, for streets and drainage and parks. It's not used all the time, it's probably used about half of the time. But we do not have a dedicated crew to operate the truck, so when they need to use it, they're pulling someone from one of the crews to operate it to pick up the brush that they need to do the project that they're working on. For us to run a brush truck full-time would mean we'd have to get another brush truck then for our operations. We'd have to have a full-time crew.
But you said it's sitting there 50% of the time.
But then we would not be available for us at all, and so we'd have to have something. You're also talking about chipping, so now you're talking about not just picking up and moving on, but you're talking about on-site chipping for a while, so your efficiency goes down because you're going to be spending more time on a particular property. So there's I think there would be a lot of costs involved with that, of us trying to do brush pickup on our own as a city.
I don't mean totally. I'm saying, and maybe move into the direction of doing it totally at one point, but to start doing some of it so that...
Well, we've been doing some of it while we got behind here. We were helping out, we were picking up special cases, using it on residential properties. Republic is caught back up now. Our contract with the third party is over. Republic is back on track. With the new contract, we anticipate that will decrease significantly. We may still end up having to use the truck then on some special cases, we probably will. But the people who are using the service are going to pay for the service now. And then with the 4 cubic yard maximum, I think you will see brush piles, I think you will see fewer brush piles for long periods of time on the streets, because people will know what week is their bulk pickup, and now it'll get picked up during that week. Right now, people aren't sure, because they just cycle through the city. So it's about every 2 weeks. But people put it out, they don't know exactly when it's going to get picked up. They might get lucky if it picks up the next day, and they might have just missed the truck, and it's out there for 2 weeks or so.
I understand what you're talking about on bulk, except, my district is very much tree, the tree district. We have a lot of trees, and I got a lot of phone calls, pushback on that, because it happens at my house. You'll just have a huge branch that will fall down, and it doesn't look that big when it's in the tree, but when it comes down, they're huge, and they're the size of a tree. And to have something in addition, and something, I don't know, I don't think that we're being prudent about it with just hiring and having picking it up and taking it away. Because we could use it. We have a tremendous amount of erosion there. We're on a hill, and...
Well, it's council, if you want us to run some numbers, but what I'm trying to tell you is that it will take away from our operations, and so that means
I would like for you to run some numbers. I would like for you to run some numbers and see if, because we used to do it, and it worked very well. And
that's what Republic does, is the brush picker. The reason that they won't do it is because it is so costly for them.
Okay,
so
before that we had Duncan. Before you came, we had
Right.
Duncan.
Yeah,
and Republic bought Duncan. Right. And Duncan was probably more geared towards Duncanville. I don't know who owned it or who started it, but it was not so just a big company. And I got a lot of phone calls from people because it is a tree area. We are a tree city.
I understand that, but it's also, you know, again, it's, do you want all the citizens to subsidize the ones who are heavily using that service, or should the people who are heavily using the service pay for the service?
How about that?
Well,
And that's what we're going to. That is the way it's set up now, or the way we're going to. It is.
but that was the same way with recycling, because there was only a certain percentage of people that were using recycling.
But
Yet everybody
recycling
paid
hasn't
for it.
changed. Right. But the brush pickup was a heavy cost. That was a significant portion of that solid waste contract. And so.
And I absolutely think that the people, because we also have a lot of contractors who are taking advantage of dumping. And
I will say that there were a lot of contractors who took advantage of the fact that it was free pickup. They'll charge
I
you the
agree.
same amount, but now they don't have to haul it off.
Oh,
And
I
people
agree.
weren't asking them to haul it off. And so everyone who was paying solid waste was subsidizing that. And people will still have the ability to get rid of their brush piles. It's just that they're gonna have to pay for that cost. Either their tree trimmer hauls it off, or they hire a
I
Republic to
got
pick
it,
it up.
and I don't mean take over the whole service. I'm saying that in addition to, because we still had brush pickup.
But how would we differentiate between that? I mean, I'm asking that question because if I know the city will pick it up from me for free, why would I hire someone?
They didn't
to
pick
do
it up. When you have brush in an area, and you can come in and chip
Oh,
it.
just chip it there?
Yeah, you're not taking it
But we have mulch
anywhere.
piles at the service center now. Everything
We
that
talked about this, Kevin. Not everybody has a pickup that they can come and pick up stuff and take it. If you chip it right there at the location, you know, you can use a wheelbarrow, you can use a bucket, you can use a shovel, and people did.
We would have to, we can run something and estimate how many we would do and chipping on site, and figure out
They
what that
did
cost
it,
would be.
you know? I know you're pushing, but they did it, and I'm not saying
That's-
trade it out totally for the whole contract. I'm saying in addition to, and especially when you have like a small storm, not one that is, you know. Do you understand what I'm talking about?
Well, I mean, you know, I guess the big thing is when we changed the contract and we went to 4 yards, whatever we've done in the past got superseded by the new contract. You know, right now, we use the brush truck for, you know, as a support function to street maintenance activities or for that. Now,
Use
if
brush
you're-
pickup for street maintenance.
we use our brush truck, the brush truck, because one of my street crews is a drainage crew, and they're the ones that pull all the stuff out of the creeks. They're
Okay.
also the ones that, when a tree falls over the road and we have to go cut and clear the road, we use the brush truck to facilitate that. That's what we use the brush truck for.
But that is not.
When we have a storm, things sort of change, and there is, you know, that's when, in our case, with this last one, we had all the big storms and Republic got behind. That's when we actually used our brush debris contractor and used, you know, city funds to supplement the Republic crews to get caught up. And then Parks Department had an operator for the brush truck that was able to flex and supplement that as well.
Wait a minute, you said they had a contractor come in and use our brush truck?
No, we had a contractor come in with two trucks.
With their own brush truck?
Yes, ma'am. And then we use the Parks Department had used one of their folks to use our brush, the city's brush truck, to sort of also do some supplementary stuff. But again, we're not staffed for that. The chipping that we do, and when we pick up the stuff you know, when we go out and pick up the stuff, we dump it at the service center, and then we bring in organics to do chipping on site, and then that's the pile of mulch that is available at the service center. But we don't have a chipper. We don't go out.
Well, you have a chipper on the truck. You did, unless it's gone.
Brush truck.
Your brush truck doesn't have it anymore?
We just bought a brand new one, so the new, not like the old one either.
Do we have a separate chipper? How do we chip what's down there?
We hire organics.
We hire someone to do it.
So what happened to our chipper? It's just gone? Well, I would think that that might be something, you know, we look at these machines. There was a machine that we were buying that we talked about that one night, that we're in a tree city, and why we don't have our own chipper.
We haven't had a need for one.
It's cheaper to hire someone to come and chip
Do
it.
you think?
I'd rather-
I mean,
I'd
have we
rather
ever
have
run the
that.
numbers on that?
Well,
But
yeah,
it'd
I
be
mean,
sitting idle.
we're not chipping every day out there, so we pile it
I
up and
bet
then
you
we bring.
could.
But then that's more personnel, and so that's
You're
additional
getting
personnel.
more personnel. It's what you deem that you want to get personnel for.
Councilmember, what you're asking me to do is, you're asking us then to take away people from parks and streets maintenance and drainage maintenance to do
No, sir, city
chipping for
manager, I'm
private
not.
citizens.
I'm saying that while we're doing the budget, to look at this aspect
Then
and maybe
that's
run
what
some money.
that's
some
what we will
numbers.
do, but I'm saying it will add personnel, so we will run those numbers of what that costs of what it takes for equipment and
Thank you.
personnel.
Okay, so we're gonna transition into.
Before you go back one thing. So, hey, Richard, so I'm looking at the fund balance, and 19 is 40, 20 is 26. What's the big difference? Why did we change from 26 to 4 and 21?
Well, it's based on the amount of expenditures. Your days of fund balance are calculated on how much you're expending each year. And so when that budget increased based on the new contract, then your days of fund balance that it takes to run that increase.
Okay, yeah, sorry, thanks.
It's no problem. So now we'll transition to capital improvement projects, and I'll turn this over to Mr. Rainey.
Good evening. The first thing I just want to talk about with y'all is street maintenance. As we talked about before, this is the money that is allocated to Public Works out of the general fund for our street O&M. So again, this is the money that we use for crack sealing, for microsurfacing, for mill and overlay, for pavement lifting, and for pavement replacement. So these are the steps that we do to maintain the roads that we have today. Now, we'll talk a little bit later about street CIP, and the difference is the street CIP is when we have a road that is degraded to the point that one of the methods that I just mentioned to you are no longer feasible, and so the road is due for a total reconstruction. And then CIP is also would be somewhere if we ever wanted to add capacity to our roads. So what I want to point out as well is in 2015 we had some folks come out and do a study and do a pavement assessment of all our streets. And based on that study, we have a program that recommends and prescribes different road treatments every year that we use to keep our roads, that they recommend all the roads that we need to maintain and which method we need to maintain them. It also tells us how much we need to have in order to achieve the goals that council set back in 2015 down at the bottom. The main thing is $3.5 million is really where we should be on maintenance. Now you can see on the chart itself, black represented the historical average for street maintenance. And so we've made significant increases since 2018 to address our streets. In 2023, we'll go back and look and again do an azimuth check to see if, how well the money that we are putting against this, which is, $1 million more than what we used to, and how that's moving and making a difference. But again, what you'll see here is the black is historical averages. Green was the additional general fund, so that's the extra money that we've dedicated to our streets since then. You'll see a few blues, which is rollovers from previous fiscal years. That happens when we have contracts that sort of bleed over into the next year. So for example, in October of 2018, which is the beginning of our fiscal year, we still had our mill and overlay contractor out doing some work, and so they ended up billing in some of that money rolled over for us to pay.
So you need $3.5 million a year going forever into the future, and we're only, I mean, we're even having to borrow, right, to just get up to 1.8.
Well, we're not borrowing to get up to 1.8. 1.8 is the amount of money that, for this particular
We have
year,
enough- that's
is
out of
reflected out of the general fund. So this is, to figure out where the red is coming from, that's the challenge.
So it's compounding, I mean, it's the problem compounds every year. I mean, it's.
Well, technically, yes, every year that we aren't at 3.5,
Right.
you know, the road, the different methodologies we were talking about, I think the best one for asphalt, you know, crack sealing, let me back up. Mill and overlay is the most expensive. But microsurfacing is 10 times less than that. And crack sealing is 10 times less than that. So the idea is that you want to do the maintenance so that we don't have to do the CIP. CIP is $1 million a lane mile is our budget, is our budgeting report, our cost estimate factor that we use.
Doesn't that vary depending on the type of material? Isn't it more expensive to reconstruct concrete streets?
So asphalt has, well, there's two parts to that. So the initial outlay of money for asphalt is less. That's correct. But over the life cycle of the road, concrete is the better value.
Oh, no doubt.
And the city ordinance specifies concrete roads. So really, the asphalt roads are the only ones that would stay asphalt. Everything new has to be concrete, and the goal would be, as we would do repairs, that if we were replacing an asphalt road, it would be going back as concrete. But that's conceptual because we don't really have much money for the actual rebuilding roads.
But ordinances are established, and ordinances can be changed, can't they?
You certainly can change the ordinances, sir.
So there's another tool in the toolbox.
Again, we were talking about capital improvement program, and so the CIP is when we're adding new capability or replacing, refurbishing existing infrastructure as well. And again, our CIP program is for streets, alleys. We roll our sidewalks into that, not our replacement that our sidewalk or our concrete construction crew does, but would be like new sidewalks in areas that are not served now. We talk about drainage systems, again, signals. We don't really have any signals going in anytime soon, and then our water, wastewater.
So in looking at our CIP, we have general government CIP, and then we have two sets of business services CIP, which is drainage and water and sewer. So
and alley.
And alley. Okay. So in terms of looking at the general government CIP, what sources of revenues are available for us to fund the street CIP program?
Just general fund.
No, what sources?
Oh, well, if we wanted to do anything else today, it would have to come from bonds.
General obligation bonds, which is what we're doing with the 3 projects that were approved in the bond election, Daniel Dale, Main Street, and Cedar Ridge. But that was only 3 projects out of how many projects we took to the bond committee, 15 or something like that. So as you see, there's unfunded of $6.8 million just in the next 5 years. But I mean, there's a number of unfunded streets projects out there. But yes, there's no dedicated source of funding for streets other than if you were to go for a general election bond.
Okay, so except general obligation bonds are repaid out of what revenue source?
There is a way to do it.
Ad valorem.
There is a way to do it, but it's going to take many years to catch up. And
Okay,
that's
I'm
basically.
talking about, I agree, but I'm talking about what can be done immediately? What can be done immediately? Is there anything that can be done immediately to rectify this? Is there anything?
Street CIP, street reconstruction?
Funding.
Street for funding?
How about sales tax?
Well, you could. It means peeling it off of something that it's already going to.
Okay, thank you.
And what was the goal that was set in 2015?
What goal?
That's 3.5.
Oh, that's for street maintenance. That's maintaining streets that have not failed. Capital improvements are for totally reconstructing streets that have failed or building new streets. We're not really building new streets, so it's all about streets that have failed, and really putting maintenance money into it is a waste of money because they're beyond maintenance. So that's why street maintenance is so important, because as long as we can extend the life of a street, then that's keeping us from having to reconstruct it, because we keep adding to its useful life. But that was $3 million for streets maintenance. But we already have a number of streets out there that have failed. And that's, again, those projects, we listed all those different projects and took those to bond committee.
So maybe one day we'll actually look at the real problems instead of dealing with the symptoms, you know, and so maybe it's this, you know, it's the strong town's method of like how you get enough money from taxes, because you got, the roads are gonna fail, and you gotta have enough income. The problem is not expense, the problem is income, you know.
Well,
So we gotta get more income.
A lot of the problem is a lot of cities don't want to address this, and they'll keep kicking the can down the road.
And that's
they
what
don't
I'm
want to
saying.
address. They don't put enough money into street maintenance.
That's
Our
because
streets
they put it
aren't
into
nearly
other
as bad as Arlington. Arlington is horrible.
because they didn't put money into street maintenance, and when they realized where they were at, it was too big a pill to swallow, and so they've done what they can. But that's really what happens is that because street maintenance is not really sexy, and so people, you know, a lot of cities don't put the adequate funds into it. And that's why they get into this situation they're at. I mean, it's just, that's the bottom line with any infrastructure. If you don't maintain it properly.
It's not y'all's fault, y'all didn't do this. It's
It
what we
did not
created
happen overnight, and it's
Created
not-
over 50 years, he
Exactly.
created it over a long time.
And
Nobody
streets
here
don't
did it.
fail, all of them at the same
But
time.
if
They
you
start-
don't have enough money in tax income, you can't keep up with what you got. If you build something you can't afford to keep up, you know, you gotta have enough revenue to keep up what you build. And it's a 50-year fix, it's not a 1-year fix.
Going back to Greg's comment about the 3 different forms of maintenance, you know, overlay is most expensive, and less expensive than micro, and less expensive than crack and seal. What we normal people deal with is the sticker shock and looking at life cycle costing. The most expensive process gives you the longer life.
Yeah.
But we look at it and go, oh no, you know, we can't swallow that pill.
Let's do something cheap.
If we're, right.
We have
if we're-
short-term
If we're
thinking.
smart, yeah, short-term thinking, but if we're smart enough, we do
That's
life
why I
cycle
change
costing
the
and say,
Yeah.
it's a heavy cost today, but we get how many years of life out of it versus short-term.
Stop the
And-
bleeding and,
Yeah.
stop the bleeding and get a patch, a good patch that's gonna not cost us more money.
I
more
call it
damage.
short-term pain for long-term
Yeah,
gain.
it's- I
And
agree.
it's unattractive
Yeah.
on top of it.
Yeah,
You
it
gotta
doesn't
do
look good, but it's the best thing to do.
Yes.
And that's where you apply the concept of life cycle costing, and those things have been around for 30 years.
So then there needs to
They're
be.
hard to implement.
Well, there needs to be a plan to go with that when you're having the short-term pain, then what are you gonna do? How are you gonna develop the sites that you have left in the city? They're gonna get maximum value, not just highest and best use, maximum value to put back into the infrastructure.
And that's the survey
So
that's done
everything-
by the professionals that evaluate our streets and tell us where those
But that's
dollars
a-
need to be posted.
That's an economic development, public works, and a planning.
Well,
joint.
something just to think about, it might be, you know, there's 2 ways to do it, and I'll talk about what mine was saying. We have 2 choices. We either double how much money we make available for street maintenance, or we have the number of streets that we maintain. You know, that's, you know, we're doing Daniel Dale, we're looking at that. The comp plan, the parks plan is recommending that maybe some of our bigger roads are a little bit too big. That's money.
A bunch of them are too big. We don't have enough traffic count on one single 6-lane road that justifies one in town.
Correct.
One.
Were you talking about Daniel Dale?
It doesn't have enough traffic.
I know,
for
I
six-
couldn't figure it out at all while I was on the pond.
But anyway, that's.
It's
bad.
It
It
needs
needs
to
to
be,
be-
the street's
that particular
failing.
portion of the
That's why it's
street
on the
is
bond, but
failing.
what we're talking about is, do we need 6 lanes, or do we go to 4 lanes? 4 lanes is cheaper to maintain than 6 lanes.
Yeah.
We don't
And-
need 6 lanes over there.
And it has
It-
irrigated
yes, do we?
medians.
Well,
Nowhere else in town do they
We
have
don't have any
irrigated.
irrigated medians anywhere.
On Daniel Dale?
We do not have irrigated medians anywhere in town.
Well, they die yellow like
They're crunchy
They
right now.
die yellow.
They're pretty
No rain.
crunchy.
They die
Oh, I
yellow.
know, because I was gonna say, we get the truck with the little squirt machine down Hill City.
The thing is, Councilmember Anderson, too, what you're talking about is, it's very difficult for any city council to raise taxes. And so it's much easier to say, well, we're not gonna raise taxes, we're just gonna defer this, or we're not gonna do this. And that's what the reality a lot of times is. So what, again, goes back to what we said at the very beginning. As part of our financial planning, what we propose to you, we're looking several years out. We're trying to be, proactive. We're trying to do what we can.
Pay us now, or pay me now, or pay me later.
But ultimately, it is
Somebody's
council's
got to take
decisions as to how you want to address these things. So what we're trying to do is show you what these things are.
I mean, you're doing a good job too. I actually I'm understanding things and it makes sense. But I'm thinking, do we just kick it to the next guys, the next generation, our kids or whatever? That's what we're doing. That's what we're making a decision to do. Or do you have a partial where you raise the taxes a little bit, but you also have a plan for creating a more efficient, more sustainable, more city
Those
that
are the
you
policy
do.
questions.
So that's what I want to get to. That's the whole point here. But to not do, that maintenance is really doing a disservice to people behind us. And
Because it's gonna catch up to us.
yeah, it already is. It's catching up to every city in the country. We're not the only ones. We have better, like Johnette said, we're better than most.
We are.
But it would be nice to be.
We built a lot of roads back in the day when it was like a 10% by the municipality. The government was kicking it 90. I mean, those were the days, and those are the roads that we're living with. This was back when we were, the city could leverage our money.
How much would you have to raise the taxes to keep the roads fixed?
You would very good.
What would the number be?
Do a general obligation.
Do a general obligation.
Go back to your street
And
maintenance.
then you take the interest rate, you take that over a number of years, we have to pay back that debt service over the raw dollar amount to fix it in one full package.
So if we look at that differential, that red bar, and we're just talking street maintenance now, we're not talking about funding for reconstruction, but just that street maintenance.
I'm just
that
talking
red
about
amount.
staying even.
Okay, yeah,
Just
so that
staying
red
even.
amount,
Not-
there is the difference between 1.8 and 3.5. Let's just say two, let's just say, okay, so that's
1.7 million.
1.7 million, and we set a penny on the tax rate's 250,000, so that's over 7 cents that you'd have to raise the tax rate.
How much would that be on a $250,000, $7 cents?
Richard, you have that in your slides earlier, he showed that, what that amount was.
That's about $15 a year, so on
On a penny?
150,000.
On a penny?
Yeah,
It's $15 a year on an average.
150,000.
7 times 15.
7 times $15.
I mean,
$105.
I'm probably the only one in here that would be interested in looking at that, but, because I know it's not popular, but I don't care.
Well, we
what's
proposed
popular.
a couple of years ago. We
Because
proposed a couple of
you're
years
gonna
ago.
just
You
move
can
it to the
also
next.
tell them to go back and cut out 10% across the board, wherever they want to do.
Well, maybe there's a
Did you
combination.
hear what I said? Yeah. Because there's other things that can be cut out besides just taxing more. There are.
Well, maybe there is, but all I'm saying is that what we're doing is we're passing a problem down to future
I got it,
generations.
but you sometimes have to cut out some of the other things. You don't just keep going back to the trough and taxing more.
Well, I don't know what you cut out. It looks pretty lean to me right
That's a
now.
council
What
decision.
would you cut out? What do you cut? I mean, I don't.
I'd let them choose.
That's what they're asking us. They're asking us.
No, I'm saying, Look, I've been on councils before that did that. It said, go back and cut out 10%. You pick. Rather than raising taxes or trying to squeeze more out of taxpayers.
I'm trying to have an attitude of 30, 40 years in the city instead of one of 3 years. That's what I'm
Well, some
trying
of
to
us
do.
have been for over 30 years, almost 40 years.
Well, then we've been doing it the wrong way then. So maybe we ought to look at, that's what that definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over, expecting different results. That's what I'm talking about. I mean, I don't want to argue with you, but you know, you have a big gap right there and it's going to get worse if we don't deal with it. If we don't.
But we do deal with it. It has been dealt with.
Got a shortfall of 1.7
You
million.
can't always, in your household and in your business, do you immediately replace and redo everything that's needed right then, or do you have to put things on a list?
I do, just with this conversation we're having here, I have that in my office every day. Every
But
single.
you have to put them on a list. And
Every single day I
and
do
they
the
have to
same
take
thing.
priority.
And sometimes I
Right.
have to bite the bullet and, you know, and borrow or do different things to make sure that I don't get in worse condition in 3 years. So it's either bad now or real bad in 3 years. So that's all I'm asking. I'm just trying to have, you don't have to get ugly with me or anything.
I'm
So
not
all I'm
getting
trying
ugly with you.
to, all I'm trying to say is that there's got to be a more of a look at this of how we bridge that gap and take care of that.
Do you know what
Staff
streets
is doing their
are?
job
Yeah.
by presenting to
I don't-
us a
it's
major
not- I'm not-
problem, and it's
I
our
trust
job
them on
in
the street.
future to work this, and this is not an easy vote. And I don't think we can just, looking at the numbers in terms of the dollars that our population pays, $3.07 a day for the services that we offer. I don't know where there's another 10% to cut. I really don't. I think we're running a good lean city right now. And
I think we can tax them more.
well, you know, nobody wants to be taxed any greater, but I know, I was talking to a mayor of one of our best Southwest cities, and their roads are in terrible shape, but they've got a $10 million bond that they're playing with because they bit the bullet about 4 or 5 years ago in order to do that job.
Maybe
And
we
whether-
should have taken over the bond group instead of having citizens, and that way we could have decided and directed where we
But there are
wanted the
so
bond
many
to
things
go.
the city needs. That 21.6 is a good expenditure. And you know, what we probably looking at what Monty is saying, is that this is a major elephant that we're dealing
So
with.
maybe-
It's not just amenities for our cities. This is maintenance of our city for economic development and infrastructure and everything else. You know, do we need a $10 million bond and bite the bullet and see how that goes?
Well,
I don't know.
I would say
I
that.
don't know if our population is going to go for that, because then we'd have to look at the debt service and how it's going to affect the tax rate. Because the 21.6 was the maximum amount of debt we could incur without increasing taxes.
That's correct.
So any other bonds that we take out is going to incur a tax increase. Whether it's going to be a 7 cent, I don't know. But it all
So
depends
maybe
on how
there
much
should-
money we want to put forward.
So then maybe there should be, we should embark, not tonight, but starting
Definitely
tomorrow,
not tonight.
on the future, into a plan that gets us, in our visioning, that gets us where we need to be up here.
Well, that's what they're doing. I mean, they've set this out perfectly. We've got a 1.7
But we
million
have to make,
vote. Every
we have
year
to
we
make a
got to vote.
decision how to get that paid for. So we,
And if there's no other way to stretch it and pull it, you know, if we can increase commercial property and get more ad valorem out of commercial property, that could be one funnel, or cash, what am I looking for?
Yes.
Revenue source.
Another revenue stream for us, then we can begin to pull some monies for that. But looking at that $1.7 million bogey, I think is smart for them to show that to us, because it's real.
definitely smart.
It's reality.
No, we
It's
don't want
reality.
to see
They're
it.
not pulling any punches with us, and that's the way it ought to be.
I agree.
Richard, and I don't know if you remember, when we were talking with the bond committee and with the council, do you recall what we said a penny on the tax rate would get us in additional bond capacity at that a year ago on a 20-year bond?
I don't. Give me a minute and I'll see if I can go back.
Because what to your point, Mayor, when we went into this bond election, our feeling was that if property appraisals kept moving upwards, and we would see that. We felt we would see some capacity in a few years to do another bond issue without changing the tax rate. However,
Senate Bill
HB, Senate Bill 2 has pretty much changed that playing field. So I don't know, but we already said we lowered the tax rate a ½ cent today, or this proposal. I don't remember now what a ½ cent would have gotten you in additional bond capacity.
So I would like to see us have the goal, because we can't get it to fix it tonight, I realize that, but I would like to see us have the goal of getting to this place where we can take care of our roads. I would like to see it in our infrastructure, not just our roads and infrastructure, because I think our economic development and our visitor development, it's like fixing up an old, you know, it's like fixing up a house. You know, if you fix up the house, yeah, it costs you a little bit more, but you're going to get more for it. I mean, we fix up the infrastructure. Companies come here, they look at this stuff, and they're going to look at, yeah, I want to be here. I want to be here. A good company instead of just, you know, dollar stores. So that's all.
At one time, Greg, I asked the question what it would cost us to actually repair all the roads in the city, and I think the dollar figure was like $30 million. Did that include repair and replacement, or was that, what was that $30 million number? I don't remember, sir. So
I think it's.
I would have to look.
I think you're better off doing it incrementally. So you do a little bit and it pays for itself. You do a little bit, it pays for itself. You do a little bit, it's easier to manage.
Isn't that what we're talking about?
Well, there's $10 million right there. If you take those 6 years and play it out, at 1.7, we're talking about $10 million. Do a $10 million bond.
$10 million is 10 lane miles. That's one of our 6-lane roads, not going very far.
Well, I'm just taking that 1.7 bogey for 6 years and saying that's a $10 million bond.
But that doesn't,
we help erase those red marks for 6 years.
But the thing is you don't want to use a bond for these things, because what you're talking about here is bonds for crack sealing.
Yeah,
bonds for microsurfacing.
The life of the project.
You know, they're not. These aren't.
You're paying for a lot
This
longer
is
than the life of the
It'd
project.
be like a savings and loan after deregulation.
I got it. It's like putting your fence on a mortgage.
That's why. Yes. That's why when we take a piece of property in town and you take a piece of property this big and you put a little bitty building on it and you only get 100,000 out of it, you got to be more efficient and put on these spaces so we get more revenue.
But I was asking about the bond amount, the capacity, because if you were looking at wanting to do more road reconstruction, CIP projects. A few years ago, when we talked with council about this street maintenance, after we did the assessment, we talked about the potential of an assessment, and a set amount that would go strictly towards street maintenance. There was some pushback from the public, and we dropped that idea, so we've not ever we've not had any discussion since then of a dedicated source of funding for street maintenance. So what we've been trying to do is just add to it out of the valuation.
How would that work, the assessment?
Well, what we were talking about was essentially a flat amount. You know, whatever, I don't remember now what we talked about. It was like $6 a month.
$7.50 or something basically per meter, per billing, per utility bill.
They were talking about adding $10 to your water bill, everybody.
Well, we talked about a couple of different $6 and $10. We just said, here's some of the amounts it would generate.
Okay.
Some cities have done a street assessment fee.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
So this is just, again, the summary slide. I tried to color code them, so the purple represents the money that we're using. We use utility CIP, and we carved out, again, the pipe bursting. We'll talk about that a little bit later, because that's part of our sanitary sewer overflow mitigation strategy. So the alley CIP, again, the alley CIP is paid as a transfer out of the sanitation fund. The green is drainage related, and so we always put a little bit of money into our bag wall program every year. And then we have the rest of it goes to other drainage projects. And then the two gray are the unfunded streets, and the darker color is for the funded streets, and we'll show you the breakdown of those. The main thing for the unfunded CIP for streets, those are just the projects, or some of the projects that were nominated for the bond that didn't get funded under the bond. the main thing with alleys that you'll see is we have a flat transfer of $200,000 a year. It's good that it's predictable, but basically what it equates to, and you'll see here and with the follow-on slide, is that with our alleys, we basically design one year, and then depending on the job, we save some money, and then we do another job, and then we design one, and then we save a bunch of money, and we do the construction, and so on and so forth. So again, for FY20, that's what you'll see is we're finishing up. We'll be finishing up the design that we awarded this year, or this fiscal year, and then we're going to go into the construction of that, and then we'll design another road, and then we'll build it, and so on and so forth. For the drainage funds, again, the main things with here is this is the money that is part of that is generated from the drainage fees that we implemented back last month in July with the first iteration. That won't be fully implemented until FY22. We were doing incremental increases every quarter.
Greg, I'm only aware of one commercial complaint. Have we received any others?
The only complaint that I've personally, are you talking about this church?
Yeah.
That's the only one I've...
That's the only one, this only complaint we've had.
What are you gonna do about it?
We denied it. They came in and
I was
said,
gonna
why?
say, 'cause
They
we
came
paid
in
for
and
their
said,
parking
why
lot,
us?
didn't we?
Well, we did, well, part of it in April, but we sent y'all the letter that.
Yeah,
that
I
went
thought so,
to them.
I thought maybe.
Our response to their questions.
Yeah.
I think there was some misunderstanding too on his part as to what the fee was about, and Greg and the mayor drafted that letter to them to respond, so. I think we
So
can
did he just
verify
take the
it.
letter, or did he come in?
Pardon?
Did he come in and?
He sent a letter.
No, he sent
I got the letter.
He sent a
I got the
letter to me.
Yeah.
Right, I got the
Yeah,
letter.
so-
Did he come in as well?
No,
He
Mayor
sent
just sent
the
them
letter.
that response letter, and we haven't heard from him. He never did come in and talk to us.
And that's the only, that's why I asked if that's the only, it's a major program, what we've done, but we've only received one complaint from anybody about it.
Or which quarter are we in on the increases?
Quarter one.
Quarter one, so this is still the first quarter, so, but I mean, I know that they're aware. I know they're aware of it. I mean, I talked with the school superintendent yesterday, he's very much aware of it.
He's one of our biggest.
And he's the
Yeah,
biggest,
he's huge.
Well,
stormwater
he's one of our
customers.
biggest tax, that we pay taxes to too. So he'd have to kind of be thoughtful about that before 52% of our taxes goes to the schools.
So again, just to highlight, just to FY20, you'll see here, Ferguson Road is one of the
Greg, I
ones.
think we can skip all this.
Sure.
But I want to hear about first, go back.
Oh, the main thing is with that one, sir, is that we're finishing up the design, and then we'll take that one under construction. And then, of course, you saw,
Greg.
well, you wanted to hear about it.
I want to hear about.
Sorry.
I want
Oh,
to hear
I
about-
picked you out, those two. Meadow Creek is also in your area. Again, so this is the streets. Really, only things funded, as you see here, is hardscape and engineering we're doing on Main Street. That's part of the predecessor, precedes the bond project there at Camp Wisdom.
and that's one that the county is participating in as well, right? On that pre-engineering.
They're looking at Camp Wisdom at Maine, Davis at Maine, Center at Maine, and then a corridor study as well through that, from Center all the way up to 20.
I'm gonna go back. What did you say about First Road? I mean, I do want to hear about First Road.
Well, I mean, I can update you. I mean, I can tell them now, or
Can you do it one-on-one with you? I mean,
You gonna stay here with me tonight?
huh?
You gonna stay here and listen with me tonight?
I brought my
I don't wanna be
phone
later than
mic,
you
but I
are.
don't intend on using it.
Yeah, go ahead.
We got a long way to
Just
go.
catch me up.
We got a long way to go on this.
Just catch me up.
So again, the utilities fund is we broke it down into pipe bursting and water wastewater. Our plan is to do $1 million a year. You'll see a little bit higher in FY20 only because our current contractor is going to run until November. Again, you saw this slide previously. I just included it again and provided you a new map This just outlines our efforts for sanitary sewer overflows. You see it's sort of a amalgamation of multiple years of effort. And what you'll see here, again, the orange is what we're planning on working on next year. And again, you'll see sort of how they tie into the yellow SSO areas. So this is our main effort to take care of the infiltration. We also do sewer basin studies, and then we do manhole spray lining as well out of the O&M side of things. As we talked about, and we kill it here, utilities program is self-sustaining, and we've talked about what we want, what y'all want to do for streets. That's all I have.
Thanks, Greg.
Don't worry, my section should take you. We're going to talk about the other funds, special use funds, the field house, and as well as the internal sales funds. They can all have their own special tab there in your budget. To get started, the hotel motel tax fund, as you can see, as compared to FY19 adopted, we have an ending fund balance of 1.7 million. The variance is there. The revenue highlights is the hotel tax revenue is going down 67,000. That's primarily due to the roadway enclosure. That loses 86,000. But then we also have an increase for the Hampton Inn and Suites as they should be open pretty soon, so we will be getting their revenue for FY20. Highlights for the expenditure side, the field house advertising budget is being decreased by 100,000 for the hotel motel side. The field house is able to absorb more of that cost. We did add a major event planning line item there for 100,000. That's just what we anticipate that cost would be. The total grant request that was received by the city did overall decrease by 24,000. Here is a list of the applications that we did receive. Yes.
Go back. I noticed in the detailed spreadsheet for Hampton and for La Quinta, both of those hotels are rated at 130,000. Is there a reason why they're identical?
That's just an estimate, Mayor, in terms of what we anticipate the performance could be. It could be slightly up or down, but that's just a good solid number of what we estimated, since they're basically fairly level in terms of the quality and the rating on the hotels, and so that's why those were rated.
Okay.
Obviously have a better idea once they've been open.
Yeah,
Start
those will be
collecting them.
adjusted in a year.
Yes. So here are the grants. We did come to you a few council meetings back going over the hotel motel grants. Again, the overall variance is down by 24,000 there. As a reminder about these grants, we've not brought them to council yet for approval, and these numbers could ultimately change, but this is based on their application that they put in.
These will be on your next agenda, and as you remember, Tuesday night you tabled the first two, the Sandra Meadows and the Chambers. But they'll all be on your next agenda.
Economic development, okay, DCEDC. We expect to end the year of FY20 with 3.4 million ending fund balance. The variances there can be highlighted by sales tax revenue. Of course, that's trending downward, so that affects the revenue in this fund. Expenditure highlights, there are some increases, recurring operating expenditures for Economic Development Administration, about 30,000 there. That includes the internship, that includes increases in salaries and benefits. We did add a facade grant line item of 25,000, but there are no proposed project expenditures currently in the FY20 budget. So hitting on the Transportation Improvement Safety Fund, as we are well aware that the funding revenue is going away. Really, once the dust settles at the end of this year, we'll have a better idea of what that ending fund balance will be for FY19 actuals. We are still getting a few tickets still coming in that people are voluntarily paying, so we're gladly accepting it. We have, at the June meeting, we did provide you the tentative list of things that we can use the fund balance for to spend that down. Some of the highlights there are, we have some further signal maintenance. We're going to expend the watch guard contract, that's for the PD body cameras. We're going to take that chunk, as well as some other identified traffic and public safety one-time expenses that have been brought through our
I quit paying my red light tickets, but I made up part with a couple of speeding tickets.
Patriot.
Okay. So getting to the field house, some things to highlight here. When we look at this fund balance, I know that looks a little scary, but the field house really has been doing pretty well in absorbing more of the cost. There's been some obviously one-time expenses that have come up that haven't been anticipated, such as paying for the AC that they've repaired. They have some one-time capital costs. They are absorbing more of their advertising, so they really are absorbing more of the cost, which is eliminating some of the general fund and other fund needs to subsidize the field house.
Well, how much is?
What's that?
How much is the bottom line that it's cost, that the field house cost us? I'm trying to.
Well, outside of debt service.
After
okay.
expenses and debt service.
So you have operating revenues. You can see they're bringing in, for FY20, for example, they're projecting to bring in 1.3 million, and their expenses they're projecting to be about 1.38 million. So I mean, we do anticipate a slight profit there at the end of the.
And then less debt service.
Right. So, yeah. So I mean, the debt service is coming from from economic development, and
well, it's coming from somewhere though, right? I mean, but what's the total negative bottom line?
Well, if you added the debt service in, which EDC will cover that until it's paid.
No, I want that added in. What's the negative?
If you go to 239,
it'd be about the debt service. In other words, it'd be about
$535,000 a year.
Right.
Pretty much.
How many more years?
I think that bond is paid off in 25.
Yes.
So
okay.
25.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Now, looking at the detail on the field house, I noticed that the sponsorship is
yeah, we're going to talk about
$25,000. Why is that?
It's really more projecting what they're expecting to come in. I think they just kind of overshot what they were expecting.
I think they kind of overestimated what they were going to be able to pull in on the sponsorships.
So the 100,000
sponsorships.
It's
We've got it up here on the third
page.
bullet under revenue.
239.
You gotta go to this one.
It has its own tab. The field house does have its own tab if you want to see more of a smaller summary. But if you want to see the 5-year, I'm sure.
Making the corresponding cuts to expenses though. So as if those revenues are not coming in as realized, or making the cuts to expenses.
Yeah.
It was a timing issue, right, as far as like some of our larger tournaments when they come in, so that, again, it depends on their total outlook on their fiscal year when it comes to when the money's hit.
They're doing really well in their food and beverage sales, better menus, quality food, things like that. That is increasing the revenue, but you also see that expenditure increasing for the food and beverage sales.
Where's the income from the Rise concession? Does that show as part of their sponsorship, or where does that show up?
It is sponsorship, but that's, yeah. It'd be their
So
sponsorship.
it's a flat rate sponsorship from Rise, it's not a percentage of their sales?
There was a percentage. They haven't had very much in sales.
As far as their,
We
merchandise.
structured it. They're a flat, I think they're a flat sponsorship amount. There is some amount for sale, but it's not very much.
So is that space being well utilized then? I mean, we got a good relationship with the Maiden brothers, but.
Well, they've shifted a lot of it over to just other merchandise, especially like the food and beverage. So they're selling a lot more on the food and beverage side, especially with tournaments and everything. So they've moved that. All the clothes and stuff out.
All that apparel has got.
A lot of apparel has been shifted over. There's some apparel, but now they're putting more on the food and beverage side.
They don't have an exclusive use of that space anymore.
Okay.
But they're still paying us the monthly rate?
They're paying us a monthly amount, right, rate,
In the-
sponsorship rate amount, or
So
lease
what all do
rate.
they do? What all do they do at the?
They provide clothing line there.
They're not doing the food and beverage. Just the
No, we are.
No, Rise is it's all apparel. It's their own brand logo.
So the total annual sales on food and beverage is 44,000.
The increase.
How much is the total for the year?
309,000.
I don't know where, 309,000?
Yeah. That's what the project, that's the 1920 budget, 309,000, which is up about $40,000.
Well, that's what they're proposing. They think it's
6,000
gonna
a
go
week.
up to that.
6,000 a week.
It's roughly what we did that team.
How many hours a week is it open? About?
Do you know that answer?
It's hard to tell.
I'd have to add them up. They open up at 8 a.m. most days. It's a weekend event. And they close at 10.
The food and beverage is not open.
The food and beverage is not
I mean,
open all
it's
the time, no.
open for events and stuff. I mean, even though the facility is open like during the week, during the day, you don't have any food and beverage sales because the people are only in there for an hour or 2 hours of a class and then they're gone. So most of our food and beverage is happening on events, especially on weekends.
It's probably really underutilized.
Yeah, it's only making 6,000 a week, so it's very low.
And I think we could sell a lot more if we had somebody in there that was,
Well, we have increased our food and beverage quite a bit, but again, it's not a full-time operation. It's not open all day long.
I understand, but what we're saying is if we had somebody in there, like at one time, we can't because Chick-fil-A won't let them. If we had like a Chick-fil-A, people would come there to eat at Chick-fil-A, not just.
Use it, operate it as a cafe or something.
Right.
They're trying to get to that point where they would like to do that, just open up to the general public, so it doesn't have to necessarily be camps or whatever. If they would like to have the cafe opened up.
Yeah,
And
and
if they had a good
public
product,
sense.
people would come to it.
Yeah, and one of the things that along those same lines we've had, and we're working towards that outdoor area, making that a lot nicer to where that would be also part of that attraction to the cafe. So that's some of the plans that we have coming up in the next year is to reach.
So we operate it right now, though?
Yeah.
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 But I can speak to that because my daughters were volleyball, and when you go there and you don't want to go home and fix dinner, you'll eat it, but you're not eating it because it's great, you're eating it because it's
Quick.
easy.
Quick.
Yeah, and if you had something that was really good, people would just come there.
And before, with the previous operator, we're now trying to utilize, we get a better efficiency on the square footage of the space. So he's trying to take space, repurpose it, and get more class space in there, again, the 360 class space and so forth. So he's really trying to squeeze more revenue out of every square foot that he can. So he's actually improved and removed some dead space that we had before that may have been used for storage. He has removed that, and now we're getting that space utilized more efficiently. So it's definitely on the upward trend.
Is the kitchen capable of producing quality food? Well, we didn't even upgrade the equipment in order to do what John is saying, to have someplace, I want to go there for lunch.
It doesn't
Instead of going to Costco for a
It
pizza.
doesn't
Field
meet,
house.
it doesn't meet my keto requirements, if that's what you're, no.
I would say
It would be
Yeah, it was the
upgraded.
product,
It would be
yeah.
Upgrade and probably
Yes, it would.
upgrade in training of staff too, and higher, level. I mean, right now what they're doing is basic.
We've got the
Yes.
fryers.
Very basic.
So, but it is, as Paul said, I mean, that's something, we're looking at, we're moving. Our assistant field house manager has food and beverage experience, so that has been, he's only been on board about a year, so but we've seen a lot of improvements already in that area, so we're moving in that direction. And yes, it has been talked about making that a destination type cafe that's not just catering to the people there, but we're not there yet.
I can see you could easily do $1 million or $1 million to a year out of there if you had the right concept.
No, I
If you
agree.
had like even, we don't have vegan, vegetarian kind of juice kind of thing there with goes with the health over there. I mean, I got a vegan place doing nearly that much out of 400 square feet in another city. So.
How about
I mean, there may
Payway?
be- I think it has to be special, something special, but I mean, it could be.
It doesn't have to be branded though.
No.
It just needs to be good.
I think it'd be
It
better
just
off
has
if
to
it's
be,
local.
just needs to have a good menu, and a good kitchen to be able to produce it, and good people to know how to produce very good food.
They act like that's nothing. That's a big deal. If you had that good, you'd be like franchised all over.
Well, and don't forget too that most of the people who are buying food are high school students.
That's right.
So their outlook on food is different than yours and mine.
Sure is.
I understand that. I don't need that, but I can tell you what, I can tell you another city right next to us, a lot of high school kids eat vegan. eat juice, drink juices and stuff like that and get juice. Go get some, I mean, so I'm just thinking, you know, I mean, it may be better to talk to some outsiders that maybe rent that space from you, you get some kind of percentage rent off of them, and you make maybe more cash flow, so there may, you know, depends on how you look at it.
Yeah.
But it's got to be all in the style and the layout and the design. I mean, that can make or break the sale. You can't just go over there and, you know, do it.
And put vegan in it.
You can laugh,
I'm not laughing. The thing is, Monty, when those guys are putting out a ton of energy playing basketball and volleyball and all that stuff, they want to eat.
I understand.
You need to have some kids that go over there.
I have kids.
No, but they're grown.
I have grandkids.
Okay.
No, so.
They want to eat.
Yeah, I get it.
You know the definition of a vegan, don't you?
What?
So you can't hunt. Let's go move on.
Let's go on. Yeah, so at the end of the day, the net income, we do project to be in the positive. So. Okay, we're just moving quickly on to the internal service fund. As a reminder, these internal service funds,
We
they
can stay
provide,
in the 80s, or we can decide to move on, you know.
they provide financing for service goods that solely support our governmental entity. Every fund, every department is charged contribution for, you know, premiums or for to fund these specific funds. The first one is a comprehensive self-insurance fund. That is the workers' comp and liability fund. The revenues, again, are contributions from the departments. The expenditures are the premiums, the workers' comp claims, the liability claims. So overall, the revenue contributions, we're not changing them at this time. The expenditure increase is small, 2%. That's the premiums, but overall claims experience is down. On the medical insurance fund summary, as you can see, FY20, we predict $784,000 in the red. Our claims experience over the last few years, as you've heard over and over again, have been very significantly high. But once we went fully insured, that has actually helped quite a bit lessen our exposure. In FY19, our runoff claims were lower than anticipated, so that's what led to less expenditures than what we predicted. For moving to FY20, we do have some good news, is that our carrier Blue Cross Blue Shield is giving us a rate pass, so there will be no premium increase overall. The revenue that we're projecting to bring in, of course, is increasing, and that compensates for the what the city pays and what the employees will be paying. We are going to increase the employee rates on certain tiers to be more in line with market. We're going to add a subsidy to employee plus spouse. If spouse has coverage elsewhere and they want to remain on our insurance, they will be paying subsidy, a penalty really for that. So expenditure highlights, there are no change for FY20. Again, since we're getting a rate pass, that expenditures are not going to be going up. As we go from year to year, we will continue to monitor and look at strategies how we can mitigate this deficit. So as you saw in the general fund, we are going to be doing another one-time transfer, $400,000 into the medical insurance to try to alleviate some of that negative deficit there. Fleet and equipment rotation, a healthy fund balance there. Funding contributions went up by 16%, but that's really just the contribution levels that we changed. Last year it was 40% overall funds. This year, general fund is 40%, utilities is 70%, solid waste is 50% contribution. Highlights of expenditures, we're getting a new bucket truck, getting Vactron in the street department, and then that valve exerciser in utilities department, we're going to be getting that as well. IT replacement fund summary. Again, ending the year, $154,000 there. We have 5-year replacements for computers.
Those are replacements, Councilman. That's replacements on those vehicles.
Chipper?
Don't just raise the tax? Chipper. Raise the taxes and get you a chipper.
I want to mention on the vehicle replacement fund though too, that what we've done is we continue to look at that fund every year. As we've said to you before, we always look at all the vehicles that are scheduled for replacement, and we determine if they need to be replaced or not. And so when they're scheduled, that's how we determine the contributions by departments to start pre-funding the replacement cost. When it comes due, every year we look at those that are planned to be replaced and determine whether they need to be or not based on their maintenance. And so we'll push a lot of them out to the next year, and that saves us money in the fund. Auction proceeds that we get from sales of vehicles go back into this fund as well. So because we've been doing well on the fund, what we have done is we've reduced the contributions last year by the departments that were paying into it, reduced them down to 40%, and then again this year we kept the general fund replacement at 40%, and the utility fund was at 70%. So they're not funding 100% in for that replacement. Because the fund is doing well, we have reduced those internal costs, which then ultimately means that that's less expenditure in the general fund, less expenditure in the utility fund.
So we have internal standards as that we also take into consideration in terms of replacing vehicles?
Well, that's what Kevin's alluding to. We meet with all the departments who have vehicles, plus our fleet manager from Public Works, and he has a standard that he has a benchmark for what it costs per mile. He takes the maintenance cost on each vehicle that we have and compares it against that benchmark. And so anytime a vehicle begins to hit that above that benchmark amount that he looks at, then we start evaluating whether we need to replace it as scheduled, or if we need to move that forward on the schedule, or if it's something doing well, we move it back. And so that's what Kevin's talking about. We move things around each year based on evaluation. We don't just carte blanche. We schedule stuff, but then we evaluate it and see if we really need to do it or not. And you know, if you look at this fund balance, it looks pretty substantial, but if you also look on the out years on that budget book, page 246, you'll see we have a pretty big year coming up in 21 in terms of scheduled replacements. Now, when we evaluate that next year for the 21 budget, we may move some of that around too.
So when a vehicle reaches a certain point, it gets on the watch list, but it's not necessarily an automatic replacement. It depends on what type of condition it's in.
That's right. We've had vehicles before that maybe we do some kind of major component replacement to, and it solves all the problems and it goes on for another 10 years or something. And I'm talking about, you know, like a large truck or something. And we have others that you go fix something on and it just starts, you know, becoming a problem child, and it stays in the shop more than it does in service.
Kind of like a Ford Explorer.
On Quince, or on our fire apparatus, they are mandated for replacement, right? 10 years frontline on fire apparatus and 10 years in reserve, and that's a mandate. So.
And the Quint is how long?
10 years frontline.
No, I know it, but I'm saying just in general, how long is the useful life for a Quint? They're saying 10 years. 10 years.
That's probably
10 years from now.
10 years is the mandated maximum, right? Frontline, and then 10 years on reserve status.
I won't be here.
So we'll use a Quint for 20 years.
This is a lighter years for replacement too. We're not buying ambulances or an
Could
engine.
you use economic development funds to do improvements, road improvements and sidewalk improvements?
Economic development funds, you can, but under certain parameters, yes, you can.
If you got enough money, economic development, after you get the field house taken care of, take care of your you get close to taking care of your $1 million deficit there on the road maintenance. And that'd be a lot better in the future. I tell you, the future cities of this country that have taken care of their infrastructure are going to be, because there's so much of it that's old, that's deteriorating. More and more people and companies are going to be looking at your plan for taking care of those. And that is a marketing tool, and that is something that we're going to one day thank the Lord that we only have 11.2 square miles to take care of, I promise. Because those that sprawl are going to have a hard time keeping up. So, I mean, I hope we can figure out.
Okay, well, this is really the last one on my
Oh, you're still, I
presentation.
thought
Talking
you were
about
done.
IT replacement.
I thought
really
you were
quick.
done. I'm sorry.
Internal service fund, it's a lighter year, less expenditures this year. We project 54 items will be up for replacement this year. The schedule is 5-year replacements on computers and about 7 to 8 years on servers. So we reduce the contribution levels in this fund as well this year because our fund balance is looking pretty healthy.
So how often do we change out the desktop software?
We change desktops out every 5 years, desktops and laptops. We stretch them out to 5. We're pushing our virtual environment out to 7, and we tend to keep our servers about 7. All of our networking switches and everything, we push them out to about 10 years. Our firewall and security hardware and devices, we tend to replace every 4 years because it's very important. Well, except for the firewalls that we just implemented, actually, they have a longer time frame, and we're actually pushing those to 8 because they're constantly offering updates to the software. So,
Do we use Office?
Microsoft Office, we do, yes, sir. We are on Office 365 here in the city. So
It updates every year?
It can. Some of us get the revisions a lot sooner than others, but we found that pushing those updates
Like that
out,
guy?
pushing those
He
updates.
gets his every year?
Yes, he should. So pushing the updates out a lot actually throws people off quite a bit. So we try not to do it so much for everybody.
Thank you.
So you use the same hardware every time you switch out, you keep the same vendor on?
Yes, sir. We use Dell.
Every time?
Every time.
So you don't sometimes will find it a different pricing using switching over to HP?
We don't.
It's just a preference you like to.
It's a preference. Me and my team, we use Dell. We like Dell. We're familiar with Dell. We actually get pretty good pricing from Dell. So the price that we pay from a laptop or a PC or desktop is actually quite low.
So I'll just share with you. I know that even as a larger company, one time I have Dell, one time I have HP. We're just looking for a better vendor when it comes to pricing. They're about the same.
So the reason why we have personal preference on Dell is because in the past when we used HP, they're not as resilient as the last us. So since we do push these out to 5 years, we want to make sure we've got something that's good that's going to last for those 5 years. Lots of the companies will lease them and we change them out every 2 years.
So we have an item of business. I'll call upon the mayor to call for a vote. We need to have a vote on the tax rate. What we have proposed is a reduction of a ½ cent from the .748447, which is the current rate, to .743447. So we need to have a straw vote.
How much money is that? How much money is it about?
The reduction in the
Per year on our budget? Our whole-
it's $250,000 for a penny, so it's a half of that.
So it's only $125.
Approximately.
So we need to take a straw vote on reducing the tax rate by ½ cent to .743447. That straw vote is just basic consent, unless there's any objection. We'll move forward with that.
Can I ask the reason that you were doing that? Is it because if you kept that ½ cent, it would have to go?
No, ma'am, so you missed the first part,
Right.
but I was talking about that. We were actually below the rollback rate,
Right.
so we did not need to lower the tax rate, but we were able to do all the things that we felt we needed to do in the budget and still be able to do a ½ cent tax rate reduction, so that's why we proposed that. But we were below the rollback.
For the second consecutive year.
And this is the second consecutive year of a tax rate reduction. Yes.
And as I modeled before, when we hit the property tax cap next year, we most certainly will be reducing the tax rate next year.
Unless property valuations go flat all of a sudden.
Correct.
So why would you reduce it this year when you don't have enough money to do, like, the road maintenance and stuff? I mean,
That is,
I mean, and you're gonna get capped, right? We're gonna have more problems in the future of raising it. I mean, do we not, I mean, sometimes I would know, one of the reasons I would say is because I don't have the discipline not to spend it in my own world, you know?
I could partially answer that question, I think, and Kevin may have a different angle than me, but from my perspective, looking at it from a financial standpoint, it lessens the impact of what we'll have to deal with next year unless we have the unfortunate situation where property values do decrease, and at this point we don't anticipate that they will. So this just lessens the impact that we'll have to deal with next year.
That was Monty, that was a risk assessment that I was referring to in terms of looking at how close we were to bumping up against that rollback.
Yeah.
This kind of mitigates that risk of being in big trouble next year.
but as I said too, we knew we had the tax rate because the county provided us that tax rate before we filed the budget. We knew we were under it. And honestly, it is a judgment call based on what I hear from council and where I think you would be comfortable. And I was not getting a sense from the majority of the council that you would be willing to stay at that higher tax rate. I felt like you would probably be more open to lowering it a little bit.
If it wasn't for us telling you what to do, what would you do? What would you recommend?
I've recommended a half-cent reduction. Yes, I feel that we're still in good shape on the budget. We were able to do the things we felt we needed to do. If you wish to put it back in that half-cent, then I would say you put that in dedicated to street maintenance. But that is your all's call. But I'm recommending a half-cent reduction.
Mine looks good on next door.
I don't care what it looks like out there. So
Right.
see, that's the thing. I'm trying to do what's best for.
The key to this whole thing is not looking at today or even tomorrow, it's looking at 21 and 22. And that's where this is really going to come into play in terms of us giving a safety net to not have to go into a resolution where the citizens are going to be coming into with the rollback rate. So and that's.
Do you understand that what you just
key.
said?
Yeah.
With the rollback rate?
Yeah, that's
And that
key.
it got, and going to them for a vote?
That's what's key.
Okay, I'm good with it.
So we have basic consent.
Unless you'll give me a chipper.
Okay, so we have, again, three important dates. We need to make sure that we have a quorum here. So especially on that 17th, September 17th, where we have to actually approve and adopt the budget. August 20th and September 3rd will be our two public hearings. So we'll be pushing those ads out to hear from the public.
Do us, the council, a great favor. When we come up for this public hearing and your presentation, please go into a little more layman's terms and understand the processes in a little more detail, not to overwhelm us with the numbers, but help us understand what we just talked about here in terms of, we did a risk assessment. What is risk? Where is that risk? What is it in 21 and 22? And how that plays, because I think they just, the routine citizen is not going to understand. It took us long enough to understand it. And I think when we have a public hearing on that, it just ought to be a little plainer language.
Yes.
Do us a favor on that.
I will do my best.
Perhaps we could do an ad. Part of advertisement. Because
We do have to do a public notification.
Yeah, I
That
have
will
to-
be part of this.
I have to advertise.
chipper. If
Oh.
We could do an ad with the manufacturer.
I'm
They
gonna
did
start
that with
a
some product
GoFundMe
on
page
the ad.
tonight.
Uh-huh.
Like donated?
And it's that.
How do you think the ads get paid for? Costco.
No,
The suppliers pay for the ads.
Right, right.
So-
Right, so I'm saying, if we could get the manufacturer to donate the chipper.
Oh, so advertising on the chipper?
No.
We're not adjourned yet. We got 55 discussions going on. Are we done?
We are
Yes, sir.
done with our presentation.
All right, we are adjourned at 8:10. Now you can